The knock on the door came at midnight, and Elena Voss knew before she opened it that her life was about to end in every way that mattered. She had been sitting alone in the dark kitchen, listening to her husband's voice through the thin wall, low and urgent, speaking to someone on the phone about numbers, contracts, and a name she did not recognize. Marcus Hale never spoke that way about anything except money. 3 years of marriage had taught her that much. He loved money the way other men loved their wives, and Elena had learned long ago that she came second to every deal he ever made. When the knock came again, sharper this time, Marcus walked past her without a glance and opened the door himself. 2 men stood outside in dark coats, and behind them, parked crooked on the street, sat a black car with tinted windows that caught no light at all. "Is she ready?" one of the men asked. Elena's stomach turned to ice. Ready for what? She looked at Marcus, waiting for him to laugh, to say this was some kind of joke, some business associate come to discuss a deal at an unusual hour. Instead, he turned to her, with an expression she had never seen on his face before. It was not anger, it was not even coldness, it was relief, plain and simple, as if a great weight had finally been lifted from his shoulders. "Elena," he said, "get your coat." "Marcus, what is this? Who are these people?" "They're here for you." The words did not make sense at first. Elena stood frozen in the hallway of the house she had lived in for 3 years, a house she had cleaned and cooked in and cried in more nights than she could count, and she waited for her husband to explain himself. He did not. Instead, he reached into the hall closet, pulled out her coat, and held it toward her, the way a man might hold out a coat for a stranger he was eager to see leave. "You're selling me," she said. The words tasted strange in her mouth, too absurd to be real, yet the moment she said them aloud, she understood they were true. "You're actually selling me." Marcus did not deny it. He simply looked past her, toward the men waiting in the doorway, and said, "The money is already confirmed?" "Every cent," the taller of the 2 men answered. "Mr. Calder does not go back on his word." Elena felt her knees weaken. She had heard the name Calder before, whispered in careful tones at the dinner parties Marcus dragged her to, always attached to talk of shipping routes and land deals worth more than she could imagine. A man that powerful did not need to buy a person. Unless the person was worth something, Elena did not yet understand. "Marcus, please," she said, and hated herself for the tremor in her voice. 3 years of silence, 3 years of swallowing her pride and her anger, and now, at the end of it all, she was begging. "Whatever debt you think I'm worth, we can find another way. Talk to me. Tell me what happened." For a moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Not guilt exactly, but the ghost of a memory, perhaps of the man he used to be before ambition hollowed him out. Then it was gone, replaced by the same flat calculation he used when closing a business deal. "Your father left me with debts I never agreed to," Marcus said. "I married you because it was the only way to keep the company afloat. You know that. You've always known that. This is simply the next transaction. Nothing more. I am not a transaction." "Tonight," he said quietly, "you are." The taller man stepped forward and placed a firm hand on Elena's arm. Not violent, but final, the grip of someone accustomed to moving property from one place to another without complication. She wanted to fight, to scream, to do something, anything, that might change the outcome of the next 5 minutes. But some instinct deep inside her, older than fear, told her that fighting here would accomplish nothing, except perhaps convincing these men she was more trouble than she was worth. And something told her that being worth trouble to men like this was far more dangerous than being valuable. So she let them lead her to the car. As she passed through the doorway for what she suspected was the last time, she turned to look at Marcus one final time. She searched his face for some sign of doubt, some flicker of the young man who had once, years ago, before the debts and the desperation, told her she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. She found nothing. He was already looking down at his phone, already calculating what he would do with the fortune about to land in his account. "You were never worth keeping," he said, not even looking up. The door of the car closed behind her, with a soft, expensive click, sealing her inside a world of leather seats and silence. The men in the front did not speak. The city passed by the windows in streaks of orange streetlight, and Elena pressed her forehead against the cool glass, trying to steady her breathing. trying to convince herself that this was a nightmare she would wake from any moment. She did not wake up. The car kept moving, further and further from the only home she had known, out past the edges of the city where the streetlights grew sparse, and the roads narrowed into private drives lined with tall iron gates. Elena watched the world change outside her window, watched the ordinary houses give way to estates that looked more like fortresses, each one hidden behind trees and stone walls, each one utterly silent. "Where are you taking me?" she finally asked. The driver glanced at her in the mirror, his eyes unreadable. "Somewhere you should have been a long time ago." It was a strange answer, and Elena turned it over in her mind, searching for meaning and finding none. She thought of her childhood, fragmented and incomplete, the early years she'd barely remembered before her father died and left her in the care of distant relatives, who treated her more like an obligation than a daughter. She thought of the small, pale scar on the inside of her left wrist, shaped like a crescent moon, which she had always assumed was the result of some forgotten childhood accident. She had never questioned it. She had never questioned much of anything. Not really. Not since the day her father's lawyer sat her down and explained that her future now belonged to whoever was willing to pay her debts. The car finally slowed as it approached a set of gates larger than any Elena had seen so far. Wrought iron twisted into the shape of a wolf's head, its eyes carved from something that caught the moonlight and glowed faintly silver. The gates opened without anyone touching them, as if some unseen hand had been waiting for their arrival. Beyond them, a long driveway wound through dark trees, toward a mansion so vast it seemed to swallow the horizon. Elena's heart pounded as the car rolled to a stop in front of wide stone steps. The two men who had escorted her from her home now stepped out and opened her door with a strange, careful courtesy that did not match the situation at all. She had expected to be dragged, pushed, treated like cargo. Instead, they waited, almost respectfully, for her to step out on her own. She climbed the stairs slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her, and the massive front doors opened before she reached them. A row of people stood inside, dressed in simple, elegant clothing, and every single one of them turned to look at her the moment she crossed the threshold. Not with curiosity, not with the casual glance strangers give one another. They looked at her the way people look at something they have been searching for their entire lives. An older woman at the front of the group pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. "It's true," she whispered. "After all this time, it's true." "What's true?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Somebody please tell me what is happening." Instead, the group parted, and a man stepped forward from the shadows at the back of the entrance hall. He was tall, with dark hair, and eyes so pale they seemed to glow faintly in the low light, and he moved with the quiet, controlled grace of someone who had spent a lifetime being watched, and had long ago stopped minding it. He stopped a few feet away from Elena, and studied her face with an intensity that made her want to step back, though something else, something she could not name, made her want to stay exactly where she was. "Elena," he said, and the way he spoke her name was different from the way anyone had ever said it before, careful and reverent, as if it were a word from a language he had almost forgotten how to speak. "My name is Damien Ashford. You have no reason to trust me yet, but I promise you, nothing here tonight will harm you." "I was sold to you," Elena said, forcing steel into her voice, even as her hands trembled at her sides. "Whatever you paid for me, whatever arrangement you made with my husband, I want no part of it. I don't care how much money changed hands. I am not property." Something shifted in Damien's expression, a flash of anger so quick and so controlled that Elena almost missed it. "You are not property," he agreed. "You were never property, not for a single day of your life, no matter what that man believed when he handed you over. What was paid tonight was not for you, it was to guarantee your safety. There is a difference, and in time, I believe you will understand it." "I don't understand any of this." "I know," Damien said, and for the first time, something almost gentle entered his voice. "But you will. Tonight, you are safe. Tomorrow, we will begin to explain." Elena wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers immediately, but exhaustion and fear had drained her of the strength to fight any further. She allowed herself to be led through the grand hallway, past portraits of stern-faced men and women, whose eyes seemed to follow her, past a library filled with books older than any she had ever seen, until she reached a bedroom larger than her entire apartment growing up. A fire already burned in the hearth, and a tray of food sat untouched on a table near the window, as though someone had known exactly when she would arrive and prepared everything in advance. "Rest," Damien said from the doorway. "No one will disturb you tonight. Tomorrow, everything will make more sense." "Wait," Elena said before he could leave. "Why does everyone look at me like they know me? I have never been here before in my life." Damien paused, his hand resting on the doorframe, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made the hair on Elena's arms rise. "Because some of them have been waiting 18 years for you to come home." He left before she could ask what he meant, and Elena stood alone in the strange, beautiful room, staring at the closed door, her mind spinning with questions that had no answers yet. She walked to the window and looked out over grounds that stretched further than she could see in the darkness, past gardens and fountains and shapes she could not quite identify moving silently among the trees. Almost against her will, her hand drifted to the small crescent scar on her wrist, tracing its familiar shape. For the first time in her life, she wondered if it truly was an accident after all. Somewhere far below, in a room she had not seen, she could hear voices rising and falling in urgent conversation. Words she could not make out, but tones she understood perfectly. Something enormous was happening around her, something that had been set in motion long before tonight, and she had walked into the middle of it without any idea of the role she was meant to play. She thought of Marcus, already spending the fortune he had earned by giving her away, already congratulating himself on solving his problems in one swift, cold transaction. He believed he had rid himself of a burden. He had no idea, not yet, exactly what he had thrown away, or what price he would eventually pay for selling something far more valuable than he had ever imagined. Elena did not sleep that night. She sat by the window until the sky began to lighten, watching the shadows in the garden shift and settle, feeling, for the first time in years, that her life was no longer something happening to her, but something about to truly begin. Morning came slowly, gray light creeping across the polished floor of the bedroom, and with it came the sound of soft footsteps outside her door. Elena had not slept, though at some point exhaustion had pulled her into a strange, half-waking state, where the line between memory and dream blurred together. She remembered flashes of a woman's voice singing softly in a language she did not know, and the warmth of arms holding her that did not belong to anyone she could name. A gentle knock brought her fully back to the present. A young woman entered, carrying a fresh set of clothes and a tray of tea, her eyes lowered respectfully. "Good morning," the woman said. "My name is Nora. I have been asked to help you settle in." "Settle in," Elena repeated, the words strange in her mouth. "Nora, can you tell me where I am? Can you tell me why everyone here looks at me as though I've come back from the dead?" Nora hesitated, glancing toward the door, as though checking that no one else could hear. "It is not my place to explain everything, miss. Mr. Ashford wishes to speak with you himself, but I can tell you that this house has waited a long time for someone like you." "Someone like me? What does that mean?" Nora only shook her head gently and set the tray down. "Please, eat something. You will need your strength for today." Elena did not feel hungry, but she forced herself to drink the tea, if only to have something to do with her shaking hands. The clothes Nora had brought were simple, but finely made, softer than anything she had owned in years, and she dressed slowly, feeling as though she were preparing for a performance whose script she had never read. When she finally stepped out of the bedroom, she found Damien waiting in the hallway, leaning against the wall with the patient stillness of someone who had been standing there for a while without complaint. He straightened when he saw her, and for a moment, his pale eyes studied her face with an expression she could not quite place. Not curiosity exactly, something closer to disbelief, mixed with quiet joy, as though he were looking at proof of something he had long stopped allowing himself to hope for. "You look rested," he said, though they both knew it was not entirely true. "I have questions," Elena said. "A great many questions, and I would like actual answers this time, not more mysterious hints." "Fair enough," Damien said, and something like a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Walk with me." He led her down a wide staircase, and through a set of doors, into a garden Elena had only glimpsed from her window the night before. In daylight, it was even more beautiful than she had imagined, filled with flowers she did not recognize, and trees that seemed impossibly old, their branches twisted into shapes that looked almost deliberate, almost like they had grown that way on purpose. 18 years ago, Damien began, walking slowly along a stone path. A man ruled over more territory and more people than you can easily imagine. He was known, among those who understood such things, as the Alpha King. He was fair. He was strong, and he had one weakness that his enemies eventually learned to exploit. What weakness? His daughter, Damien said quietly. A child born with a mark on her wrist that identified her as his true heir. There were those within his own court who feared what she represented, who wanted power for themselves and saw the child as an obstacle. When they moved against the king, he did the only thing he could to protect her. He hid her away, far from the world she was born into, and erased every trace connecting her to her true identity. Elena stopped walking. Her hand rose almost unconsciously to her wrist, to the small crescent scar she had carried her entire life without understanding. "You cannot possibly be suggesting," she said slowly, "that you believe I am this missing child." "I do not simply believe it," Damien said, turning to face her fully. "I have spent 18 years searching for proof, and last night, when you walked through those doors, I saw a mark that matches records buried so deep that almost no one alive remembers they exist. I am not asking you to accept this on faith alone. There are tests, records, people who knew your mother, who will confirm everything I am telling you, if you are willing to let them." "My mother," Elena repeated, the word catching in her throat. She had no memories of a mother at all, only fragments, a lullaby she could never quite place, a warmth she had always assumed was imagination. "Her name was Isolde," Damien said gently. "She loved you more than anything in this world. She died protecting the secret of who you truly are, and your father disappeared not long after, hunted by the very people who should have been loyal to him. For 18 years, this house, this family, has waited for the day the true heir would return." Elena felt the ground shift beneath her, not literally, but in every sense that mattered. Everything she had believed about her life, her ordinary, disappointing, loveless life, suddenly seemed like a story someone else had written for her. A costume she had been forced to wear, while her real identity waited patiently underneath. "This is insane," she whispered. "Yesterday I was a woman sold by her own husband for money. Today you're telling me I'm the daughter of some kind of king." "I understand this is difficult to accept," Damien said, "but consider this. Marcus Hale did not simply sell an unwanted wife last night. Word of your appearance has already spread. Men far more dangerous than your husband are asking questions this morning, wondering how a man who owed debts he could never repay suddenly found himself with more money than he has ever seen in his life. They are asking who would pay such a price for an ordinary woman, and I promise you, Elena, the answer will not stay hidden for long." A chill ran through her despite the warm morning sun. "Are you saying I'm in danger?" "I am saying," Damien said carefully, "that the moment your identity becomes known beyond these walls, there will be those who see you as a threat to remove, and others who see you as a prize to claim for themselves. I brought you here to protect you, not to frighten you, but you deserve to understand the truth of your situation completely." Elena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the sunlight. 24 hours ago, her greatest fear had been living out her life in a marriage without love, trapped by circumstances beyond her control. Now she stood in a garden that felt like something from an old story, being told that her entire existence had been built on a lie, that somewhere out there, people who had murdered to protect their power might soon learn she was still alive. "I don't know how to be whoever you think I am," she admitted quietly. Damien's expression softened, and for a moment, the careful distance he had maintained since she arrived seemed to slip away entirely. "You don't have to know yet. No one expects you to become someone new overnight. All I ask is that you stay, that you let us show you the truth in your own time, and that you trust, even a little, that everyone in this house wants only to keep you safe." Elena looked past him, toward the mansion rising behind them, its windows catching the morning light, and thought of the strange, tearful faces that had greeted her the night before. Whatever waited for her within these walls, she understood now that there was no simple road back to the ordinary life she had left behind. Marcus had made certain of that, the moment he opened the door, and handed her away like an object he no longer wanted. "All right," she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. "Show me the truth, all of it. I want to understand exactly who I am, and exactly what I'm walking into. Something like relief passed over Damien's face, though beneath it, Elena thought she saw a flicker of worry he was trying carefully to hide. Then let's begin, he said, with your mother. They turned together and walked deeper into the garden, toward a small stone building Elena had not noticed before, half hidden beneath a curtain of ivy. Whatever waited inside, she knew with a certainty that surprised her, would change everything she thought she understood about her own life. And somewhere far away, in a city she had left behind only hours earlier, Marcus Hale sat in his office, counting the money now sitting in his account, entirely unaware that the woman he had so easily discarded was about to become the most sought-after person in a world he did not even know existed. Marcus Hale poured himself a drink before noon, something he rarely allowed himself to do, but the morning had left him restless in a way money was supposed to cure. He stood at the window of his office, looking down at the city below, and told himself again that he had made the right choice. The debts were gone. The company was safe. Whatever guilt tried to creep into his thoughts, he pushed it aside with the same practiced ease he used for every uncomfortable feeling. His assistant knocked and entered without waiting for a response, her face pale. "Mr. Hale, there are men here to see you. They say it's urgent." "Tell them I'm busy." "Sir, I don't think that's a good idea." Something in her tone made him look up properly. Before he could ask what she meant, two men stepped past her into the office, dressed in dark suits that fit too well to belong to ordinary businessmen. Marcus recognized the look of quiet danger in their eyes immediately, the same look he had seen in the men who had come to collect Elena the night before, though these two carried themselves with even greater authority. "Mr. Hale," the first one said, closing the door behind him, "we understand you recently completed a transaction involving your wife." Marcus's mouth went dry. "That's private business. I don't see how it concerns you." "It concerns us a great deal," the second man said, stepping further into the room. "We represent interests that take a particular concern in anyone connected to the woman you sold. We would like to know exactly who purchased her, and why." "I don't know who they were," Marcus said, his voice less steady than he wanted it to be. "A man named Calder arranged everything through intermediaries. I never met him directly. I was told the payment was compensation for old family debts." The two men exchanged a glance that made Marcus's stomach tighten. "Old family debts," the first man repeated slowly. "Tell me, Mr. Hale, did anyone explain to you exactly whose debts those were, or why a man like Calder would take a personal interest in settling them?" "No," Marcus admitted. "I didn't ask questions. I needed the money." "Of course you did," the man said, not unkindly, though something in his tone made Marcus feel smaller than he had in years. "Men like you rarely ask questions when money is placed in front of them. Unfortunately for you, ignorance will not protect you from what comes next." "What do you mean, what comes next?" "I fulfilled my end of the arrangement. The transaction is finished." The first man smiled, though there was no warmth in it at all. "Mr. Hale, do you have any idea what you actually sold last night? You believed you were ridding yourself of an unwanted wife in exchange for a fortune. In truth, you handed over something far more valuable than money could ever measure, to people whose reach extends well beyond anything you understand. Word travels quickly in certain circles, and already, questions are being asked about how an ordinary businessman came to possess something so precious in the first place." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "I don't understand." "You will," the second man said. "For now, understand only this. You are no longer simply a man who sold his wife for money. You are now a man who knows where the missing heir has been hiding for 18 years, and there are people in this world who will pay far more than Calder ever offered you to learn that same information, and others still, who would rather silence you completely than risk you sharing it with the wrong ears." The office suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in around Marcus in a way he had never experienced before. "I don't know anything about an heir. I don't know anything about any of this." "That," the first man said, moving toward the door, "is precisely the problem. Ignorance has never once protected a man from the consequences of what he has done. We suggest you consider your next steps very carefully, Mr. Hale. The money in your account will do you little good if you are not alive to spend it." They left as quickly as they had arrived, leaving Marcus standing alone in his office, his drink forgotten on the desk beside him, his hands trembling for the first time in longer than he could remember. He had spent 3 years treating Elena as an obligation, a burden inherited from a father-in-law who had left him drowning in debt. He had never once considered that she might be something else entirely, something valuable beyond the narrow scope of his own ambitions. He sank into his chair and stared at the phone on his desk, wondering who he could possibly call for help, and realizing, with a cold and sinking certainty, that there was no one. He had built his entire life around the pursuit of wealth, and in doing so, he had made himself precisely the kind of man that people used and discarded once they had gotten what they needed from him. Far away, in the stone building hidden behind ivy in the gardens of the Ashford estate, Elena stood in front of a wall covered in old photographs, feeling the last pieces of her ordinary life fall away entirely. "This was your mother," Damien said, pointing to a photograph of a woman, with dark hair, and eyes so pale they seemed to glow, standing in a garden that Elena recognized, with a jolt, as the very one she had just walked through. "Isolde Voss. She was gentle and fierce, and she loved your father more than anything, except perhaps for you." Elena stared at the photograph, searching the woman's face for some trace of herself, and found it there, unmistakable, in the shape of the eyes and the curve of the mouth. Something in her chest tightened painfully. "And this," Damien continued, moving to another photograph, "was your father. Gideon Voss, the Alpha King." The man in the photograph stood tall and proud, dressed in simple dark clothing that somehow radiated authority, his expression calm but his eyes sharp with intelligence, and something that looked almost like sorrow, as though he had known even then what the future held for him. "He looks like he's carrying something heavy," Elena said quietly. "He was," Damien said. "Even before everything happened, he understood the dangers surrounding him. Being the Alpha King was never simply about ruling. It meant standing at the center of every ambition, every jealousy, every hidden agenda within a world far larger and more complicated than most people ever glimpse. He protected his people fiercely, but that same devotion made him a target for those who wanted power, without the burden of caring for anyone but themselves." Elena moved slowly along the wall, studying photograph after photograph, faces she did not recognize but somehow felt connected to in ways she could not explain. In one image, her mother stood laughing beside a fountain, cradling an infant in her arms. Elena's breath caught. "Is that me?" "Yes," Damien said softly, taken only weeks before everything changed. Elena reached out, almost touching the photograph, then pulled her hand back, overwhelmed by emotions she did not have names for. Grief, for a mother she could not remember. Anger at a world that had stolen her identity before she was old enough to understand what she was losing. And beneath it all, a strange, quiet longing to know more, to understand the woman in these photographs, to somehow reclaim the years that had been taken from her. "What happened to them?" she asked. "My parents. Tell me everything." Damien was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "Your father trusted the wrong people. There were members of his own council who believed the throne should belong to a different branch of the family entirely, one more willing to bend to outside interests in exchange for personal gain. When your father refused to compromise the safety and freedom of his people, they moved against him. Your mother discovered the plot before it could fully unfold, and she used what little time she had to get you to safety, far from the world that had turned against your family. And she died doing it," Elena said, the words settling heavily in her chest. "She died protecting you," Damien corrected gently. "There is a difference, though I understand it may not feel that way right now." Elena turned away from the photographs, needing a moment to breathe, to process the weight of everything she had learned in the span of less than a day. "And my father? You said he disappeared. Does that mean he might still be alive?" Something shifted in Damien's expression, careful and guarded. "There have been rumors over the years, sightings that could never be confirmed, whispers among those still loyal to him that he survived and has been waiting, watching, for the right moment to return. I cannot promise you he is alive, Elena. But I can promise you that I have never stopped searching for the truth, about him and about you." "Why?" Elena asked. "Why does any of this matter to you personally? You could have simply left me to whatever life Marcus arranged for me. Instead, you've spent years searching, and apparently paid a fortune to bring me here. What do you actually want from me, Damien?" The question hung in the air between them, And for a moment, Damien's carefully controlled expression wavered, revealing something raw and complicated underneath. Your father saved my life once, long before any of this happened. I owe him a debt I can never fully repay, and finding you, protecting you, is the closest I will ever come to settling it. Beyond that, he paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. Beyond that, Elena, I believe you deserve the chance to know who you truly are, regardless of what that knowledge costs any of us. Elena studied his face, searching for any sign of dishonesty, and found none, only a quiet, steady sincerity that both comforted and unsettled her in equal measure. Whatever complicated history connected Damien to her family, she sensed that his loyalty ran deeper than simple duty. Before she could ask anything further, the door to the small stone building burst open, and a young man rushed inside, breathless and pale. Damien, he said urgently, we have a problem. Word has already reached the council. They know she's here. Damien's expression hardened instantly, all trace of softness disappearing beneath a cold, focused intensity Elena had not seen from him before.
How is that possible? We only brought her in last night.
I don't know how, the young man said. But Lord Edmund has already called an emergency session. They're demanding to see her, tonight, before anyone can verify her identity through proper channels. Some of them are saying it's a trick, an imposter meant to weaken your position within the council. Others are saying far worse. Elena felt her earlier calm shatter completely, replaced by a fresh wave of fear. She had barely begun to understand who she was supposed to be, and already, forces she did not understand were moving against her, questioning her existence, threatening consequences she could not yet imagine. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely steady. Damien turned to her, and for the first time since she had arrived, she saw genuine worry etched clearly across his face. Now, he said quietly, we prepare you to face people who will not simply take my word for who you are. Tonight, Elena, you will need to prove it yourself. Nora arrived within minutes, carrying a garment bag and a small wooden box, her earlier calm replaced by brisk, focused urgency. We don't have much time, she said, setting the box down on a table. The council meets at sunset, and they will expect you to look the part, even if you don't yet feel it. I don't understand what proving my identity actually means, Elena said, watching Nora unpack the box to reveal what looked like old documents and a small silver bracelet tarnished with age. Damien said there were tests. What kind of tests? There are ways to confirm bloodlines that go back generations, Nora explained, carefully unfolding one of the documents. Blood markers that cannot be faked, and elders who knew your mother well enough to recognize her in your face and your voice. But the council does not simply want proof. Some of them want an excuse to reject you, no matter what evidence stands in front of them. Why would anyone want to reject me? I never asked for any of this. Nora's expression grew somber. Because your return threatens the comfortable arrangements many of them have built over the last 18 years. Power that shifted into new hands during your father's absence would need to shift back, and not everyone is willing to give up what they've gained without a fight. Elena absorbed this information quietly, feeling the true scale of her situation settle over her like a heavy weight. This was not simply a matter of family history or personal identity. She had walked into a world where her very existence threatened people with resources and influence far beyond anything she had ever encountered. Damien returned an hour later, dressed differently than before, in clothing that carried an unmistakable air of formality and authority. He studied Elena for a long moment, taking in the careful preparations Nora had made, before speaking. There is something you should know before tonight, he said. Among those who will be present is a man named Victor Crane. He served as an advisor to your father before everything happened, and he has grown considerably more powerful during the years of your father's absence. He will almost certainly be the loudest voice questioning your legitimacy. Why would he do that if he served my father loyally? That, Damien said carefully, is a question I have asked myself for many years without finding a satisfying answer. Watch him closely tonight, Elena. Whatever else happens, trust your instincts about him. The warning settled uneasily in Elena's mind as the afternoon light began to shift toward evening, each passing hour bringing her closer to a confrontation she felt entirely unprepared to face. She thought of her mother's photograph, the warmth in her eyes as she held her infant daughter, and wondered if that same woman had once stood in rooms like the one Elena would soon enter, facing councils and challenges of her own. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the estate grounds, Elena stood at her window one final time, staring out at a world that had changed entirely in the span of a single day. Somewhere beyond these walls, a council of powerful strangers waited to judge whether she deserved to claim the identity that had been stolen from her before she was old enough to understand its weight. She touched the crescent scar on her wrist one more time, drawing whatever strength she could from the mark that had connected her to this hidden world all along, and turned to face whatever waited for her downstairs. "I'm ready," she told Damien when he came to collect her, though the tremor in her voice suggested otherwise. Damien studied her carefully, and something in his gaze softened, just slightly. "You carry your mother's strength, whether you feel it yet or not. Whatever happens tonight, Elena, you are not walking into that room alone." Together, they descended the grand staircase, toward the sound of gathered voices, low and tense, drifting from behind a set of tall wooden doors at the end of the hallway. Elena's heart pounded with every step, and as the doors swung open to reveal a room filled with unfamiliar faces, all turning at once to study her with expressions ranging from hope to open suspicion, she understood that the true test of her identity, and her courage, was only just beginning. The council chamber fell into complete silence the moment Elena stepped through the doors, dozens of eyes fixed on her, with an intensity that made her want to turn and run. Instead, she forced herself to walk forward, matching Damien's steady pace, her chin lifted despite the fear churning in her stomach. The room was circular, lined with tall windows that let in the last golden light of sunset, and at its center stood a long table where a dozen men and women sat waiting, dressed in clothing that spoke of wealth and old authority. At the head of the table sat a thin, silver-haired man whose eyes tracked Elena's every movement with cold, calculating interest. "So," he said, his voice carrying easily across the chamber, "this is the girl you claim is the lost heir." "This is Elena Voss," Damien said firmly, "daughter of Isolde and Gideon Voss, bearing the mark of the true bloodline." "Claims are easily made," the silver-haired man replied. "I am Victor Crane, Miss Voss, and I have served on this council since before you were born. Forgive me if I require more than a young man's word to accept such an extraordinary claim." Elena felt the weight of every gaze in the room pressing against her, and she remembered Damien's warning from earlier. This man, more than anyone else present, would fight against her acceptance with everything he had. She studied his face carefully, searching for the reason behind such determined opposition, but found only smooth, practiced neutrality. "I understand your skepticism," Elena said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "I only learned the truth about my identity yesterday. I have no memories of this world, no knowledge of who my parents truly were until Damien explained it to me. If you have a way to prove or disprove my identity, I welcome it. I have nothing to hide." A murmur passed through the gathered council members, some exchanging surprised glances at her composure. Victor Crane's expression flickered, just slightly, before settling back into cold neutrality. "Very well," he said. "Elder Miriam, if you would." An elderly woman rose from her seat near the far end of the table, moving slowly, but with evident purpose. She approached Elena carefully, studying her face with eyes clouded slightly by age but sharp with intelligence. "I knew your mother," the elder said quietly, close enough now that only Elena could hear her clearly. "I helped deliver you into this world, child. May I see your wrist?" Elena extended her arm without hesitation, and the elder took it gently, turning it to examine the crescent scar beneath the dim chamber light. For a long moment, she said nothing at all, simply tracing the mark with a trembling finger, her expression unreadable. "This is the mark," she finally announced, turning to address the full council. "I would recognize it anywhere. I placed the protective charm on this child myself, the very night her mother sent her away." Relief flickered through Elena's chest, though it was quickly overshadowed by Victor Crane's immediate response. "A scar alone proves nothing," he said sharply. "Marks can be replicated by anyone, with sufficient knowledge and resources. I require more definitive proof before I accept a claim that would reshape the entire balance of power within this council." "What kind of proof would satisfy you, Victor?" Damien asked, his voice carrying an edge of barely controlled frustration. "We have brought you the mark, the testimony of an elder who assisted at her birth, and a face that carries an unmistakable resemblance to both her parents. What more could you possibly demand? Victor Crane's eyes narrowed slightly. Blood testing. The old rituals that cannot be falsified or manipulated by clever tricks. If this girl truly carries the bloodline of Gideon Voss, the ritual will confirm it beyond any doubt. If she does not, we will have saved ourselves from being deceived by whatever scheme is truly unfolding here. The room fell silent, tension crackling in the air. As council members exchanged uncertain glances, Elena looked toward Damien, uncertain what this ritual might involve, and saw a flash of concern cross his features before he carefully smoothed it away. The ritual carries risk, he said quietly, meant only for Elena's ears. It has not been performed in decades. I cannot guarantee your safety through the process. What choice do I have? Elena whispered back. If I refuse, they will never accept me. And if what you've told me is true, refusing might be even more dangerous than the ritual itself. Damien studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing the decision, before finally nodding, almost imperceptibly. Very well, he announced to the council. We accept the challenge of the ritual. A servant was summoned, carrying a small ornate box that Elder Miriam opened with careful, practiced hands, revealing a thin silver blade and a shallow bowl carved from dark stone. Elena's heart pounded as she watched the elder prepare the items, understanding now that whatever came next would involve more than simple observation. This will require a small offering of blood, Elder Miriam explained gently, placed within the bowl, combined with elements tied to your father's bloodline. If you are truly his daughter, the mixture will respond in a way that cannot be faked or forced. If you are not, nothing will happen at all. Elena extended her hand, trying to steady her breathing as the elder made a small, careful cut across her palm, collecting several drops of blood into the stone bowl. The room watched in complete silence as Elder Miriam added a pinch of dark powder and a small vial of clear liquid, stirring the mixture slowly with an ancient silver instrument. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened at all, and Elena felt her stomach drop, certain that somehow the entire ritual would fail, proving nothing except that she truly was nobody, an ordinary woman who had been sold and traded and now stood exposed as a fraud in front of a room full of powerful strangers. Then the mixture began to glow. It started as a faint shimmer, barely visible in the dim chamber light, before growing steadily brighter, until the entire bowl radiated a soft, silver luminescence that cast strange shadows across the walls of the council chamber. Several council members gasped audibly, and Elder Miriam stepped back, her weathered face filled with something close to awe. The mark of the true bloodline, she announced, her voice trembling with emotion. There can be no doubt remaining. This woman is the daughter of Gideon and Isolde Voss, heir to the throne of the Alpha King. The chamber erupted into a mixture of astonished murmurs and scattered applause, though Elena noticed that not everyone joined in the celebration. Several council members remained notably silent, their expressions guarded, watching the proceedings with calculating eyes that made her uneasy, despite the ritual's undeniable results. Victor Crane's face had gone pale, his earlier confidence visibly shaken. This is unexpected, he said carefully, though something beneath his controlled tone suggested far deeper unease than his words conveyed. Nevertheless, the ritual speaks clearly. I withdraw my objections, for now. The qualifier at the end of his statement did not escape Elena's notice, and she caught Damien's eye across the room, seeing the same wariness reflected there. Whatever had just been proven beyond doubt, she understood that her acceptance into this world would not come without continued resistance from those who saw her return as a threat to their own ambitions. As the council began to disperse, murmuring among themselves about the historic nature of what they had just witnessed, Elder Miriam approached Elena once more, taking both her hands gently. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become, the elder said softly. Even without knowing the truth of who you were, you carried her strength within you all along. Thank you, Elena said, genuinely moved by the woman's kindness amid the chaos of the evening. Did you know my father as well? Something complicated passed across Elder Miriam's face. I did. A good man, burdened by responsibilities he never wanted, but carried faithfully nonetheless. I pray, wherever he may be tonight, that he somehow knows his daughter has finally come home. Before Elena could ask more, A commotion near the chamber doors drew everyone's attention. A young guard rushed in, breathless and clearly alarmed, whispering urgently to Damien, whose expression darkened with each passing word. "What is it?" Elena asked, moving quickly to his side. "What's happened?" Damien turned to her, his jaw tight with barely controlled anger. "There has been an incident at the outer gate. Someone attempted to breach the estate grounds less than an hour ago, during the exact time the council was assembled to verify your identity." "Who would do that?" "We don't know yet," Damien admitted, "but the timing is far too precise to be coincidence. Someone wanted access to this estate while our attention was fully occupied elsewhere, and I intend to discover exactly who and why." Elena felt a fresh wave of fear settle over her, the brief triumph of her acceptance by the council, now overshadowed by this new, unsettling development. She had barely begun to understand the dangers surrounding her new identity, and already, threats seemed to be emerging from every direction. "Do you think it's connected to Marcus?" she asked. "To whoever paid for me last night?" "Possibly," Damien said, though his tone suggested he considered other explanations equally likely. "Or it could be connected to someone within these very walls, someone who was perhaps less pleased by tonight's outcome than they wished to appear." His eyes drifted, almost involuntarily, toward the doorway where Victor Crane had just departed, and Elena felt a chill settle over her that had nothing to do with the evening air drifting through the chamber's tall windows. Whatever celebration might have accompanied her acceptance into this hidden world was cut brutally short by the reminder that danger surrounded her from every side, hidden among faces that smiled warmly one moment and calculated her downfall the next. As Damien led her from the council chamber, already issuing quiet orders to increase security throughout the estate, Elena understood with growing clarity that surviving this new world would require more than simply proving her bloodline. It would require learning, quickly, exactly who among the many faces surrounding her could truly be trusted, and who was merely waiting for the perfect opportunity to ensure the lost heir never lived long enough to claim her rightful place. Outside, beyond the estate's high walls, the night had grown fully dark, and somewhere within that darkness, unseen eyes watched the mansion's lit windows with patient, calculating interest, waiting for their moment to act. Damien led Elena through a side corridor toward the estate's security office, a room she had not yet seen, filled with screens displaying various views of the grounds outside. A tall man with close-cropped hair stood at the main console, his expression grim as he reviewed footage from earlier that evening. "Ronan," Damien said, "tell me what we're dealing with." The man turned, giving Elena a brief, assessing glance before addressing Damien directly. Two intruders approached the eastern perimeter around the same time the council convened. They moved with clear knowledge of our patrol patterns, which suggests either careful surveillance beforehand or information from someone familiar with our security arrangements. "Someone inside," Damien said quietly. "That's my concern as well," Ronan admitted. "The intruders retreated the moment our patrol adjusted, before we could identify them or make contact. Whoever sent them clearly wanted information about our defenses without risking direct confrontation, at least not yet." Elena listened to the exchange with growing unease, understanding that this was not simply a random attempt at trespassing, but a calculated test of the estate's vulnerabilities. "What were they after?" she asked. "If it wasn't a direct attack, what would be the purpose of testing your defenses tonight specifically?" Ronan glanced at Damien before answering, as though seeking permission to speak freely. When Damien nodded, he continued, "Miss Voss, forgive my directness, but the timing suggests someone wanted to know exactly how difficult it would be to reach you, now that your identity has been confirmed. Testing our response time, our patrol gaps, our overall readiness. It has the feel of preparation for something larger." The words settled heavily in Elena's stomach. Only hours after learning her true identity, she was already being treated as a target requiring careful, strategic planning to reach. The magnitude of the danger surrounding her seemed to grow with every passing hour. "I want increased patrols along the entire perimeter, starting immediately," Damien instructed, "and I want a full review of everyone who had access to the council's schedule today. If someone inside arranged this timing, I intend to find them." "Understood," Ronan said, already turning back to his console to begin issuing the necessary orders. Damien guided Elena from the security office, his expression thoughtful and troubled as they walked back toward the main hallway. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You should have had tonight to simply process everything you learned, without immediately facing new threats on top of it all." "I don't think I have the luxury of a quiet adjustment period," Elena said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. "Not with everything you've told me about the dangers surrounding my identity. I would rather understand the threats clearly than be protected from the truth of my own situation." Something like respect flickered across Damien's face. "Your father used to say something similar. That knowledge, even difficult knowledge, was always preferable to comfortable ignorance." "Tell me more about him," Elena said. "Not the Alpha King, my father. What was he actually like?" They had reached a quiet sitting room near the edge of the main hallway, and Damien gestured for her to sit, settling into the chair across from her, with the careful consideration of someone choosing his words thoughtfully. "He was patient," Damien said, in a way that surprised people who expected someone in his position to be harsh or quick to anger. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, people tended to remember his words for a long time afterward. "He loved your mother fiercely, and when you were born, I have never seen a prouder man in my entire life." Elena felt tears gathering unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes, mourning a father she had never truly known, a life that had been stolen from her before she was old enough to remember any of it. "Do you truly believe he might still be alive somewhere?" Damien was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with how much hope to offer her. "I have chosen to believe it, because the alternative feels like giving up on a search I promised myself I would never abandon. But I cannot promise you certainty, Elena. I can only promise you that I will continue looking for the truth, whatever it turns out to be." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her, a recognition that beneath his careful, controlled exterior, Damien carried genuine devotion to a cause far larger than simple duty. She found herself studying his face in the soft lamplight, noticing details she had been too overwhelmed to register before: the faint scar along his jaw, the tired lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent carrying burdens few people around him truly understood. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything you've done, even before I understood what any of it meant." Damien met her gaze, and for a moment, something passed between them that neither seemed entirely prepared to name. Before either could speak further, a soft knock interrupted the moment, and Nora appeared in the doorway, her expression apologetic. "Forgive the intrusion," she said, "but Elder Miriam wishes to see Miss Voss before the evening ends. She says it's important." Damien rose immediately, his earlier warmth replaced by careful alertness. "I'll come with you." They found Elder Miriam waiting in a small study lined with old books, her expression grave as she gestured for them to sit. "I did not wish to speak of this in front of the full council," she began, "but I believe you deserve to know the complete truth, Elena, about what happened to your parents, and specifically, about who among the council may have played a role in the tragedy that separated your family." Elena leaned forward, every sense sharpened with anticipation. "Please, tell me everything." Elder Miriam glanced toward the closed door, as though ensuring their privacy before continuing in a low, careful voice. "On the night your mother sent you away, she confided something to me, something I have carried alone for 18 years, uncertain whether the truth would ever matter again. She told me she suspected someone close to your father, someone he trusted completely, had been quietly working against him for years, feeding information to his enemies in exchange for promises of power once he was removed." "Do you know who?" Damien asked urgently. Elder Miriam shook her head slowly. "Your mother never told me a name, only that she feared the betrayal ran deeper than anyone suspected, closer to the throne than anyone would willingly believe. She asked me to watch, to listen, and to protect you, if the day ever came when you returned seeking answers." Elena's mind raced through the faces she had encountered that evening, searching for any indication of hidden treachery. "Victor Crane," she said slowly. "Is it possible?" "It is possible," Elder Miriam admitted. "He has certainly grown more powerful during your father's absence than seems entirely explainable through simple circumstance. But I caution you both against assuming his guilt without proof. False accusations can be just as dangerous as hidden betrayals, especially within a court, as delicately balanced as ours currently remains." Damien's expression had grown increasingly grim throughout the conversation. "Whoever betrayed Gideon Voss 18 years ago is very likely still active within this council today. watching Elena's return with considerably more interest than simple political concern. Tonight's intrusion may well be connected to exactly this same hidden enemy. The weight of this realization settled over Elena like a physical burden. Somewhere among the very people who had welcomed her tonight, tested her identity, and celebrated her acceptance into their world, a traitor waited patiently, watching her every move, planning consequences she could not yet begin to imagine. "What do we do now?" she asked quietly. Damien's eyes met hers, steady and resolute, despite the uncertainty surrounding them both. "Now," he said, "we proceed very carefully, and we trust absolutely no one until we understand exactly who among us can truly be trusted at all." As Elder Miriam gathered her things to leave, urging them both to remain vigilant, Elena felt the full weight of her new reality settling over her shoulders. She had spent 3 years trapped in a marriage without love, believing herself powerless and unwanted. Now, in the span of a single day, she had discovered an entire hidden world waiting to both celebrate and destroy her, depending on which hidden hands controlled the outcome. Whatever safety she had hoped to find within these estate walls, she understood now that true safety would remain elusive until the shadow of betrayal hanging over her family's history was finally brought fully into the light. Marcus had not left his office in 2 days. He told his assistant he was working on an important deal, but the truth was far simpler and far more humiliating. He was afraid to go home, afraid to walk the streets he had once considered entirely his own, afraid of the shadows that seemed to follow him everywhere he turned. The warning from the 2 men had haunted him every waking hour since they left. He had tried calling the number associated with Calder's original offer, desperate for reassurance, for some confirmation that the transaction was truly finished, and no further consequences awaited him. The number no longer connected to anything at all. His phone buzzed against the desk, and Marcus flinched before answering, his nerves stretched thin from constant anticipation of danger. "Hello? Mr. Hale." The voice was unfamiliar, smooth and confident, in a way that immediately set Marcus on edge. "My name is not important. What matters is that I represent parties who believe you possess information of considerable value." "I already told the others. I don't know anything," Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly. "I sold my wife to settle a debt. That's all I know." "Your wife," the voice repeated, almost amused. "Do you understand what you actually sold, Mr. Hale? Or has no one bothered explaining the full picture to you yet?" "Please," Marcus said, hating the desperation creeping into his tone. "Just tell me what you want." "Information," the voice said simply. "We know Elena was taken to a private estate on the outskirts of the city. We need to know exactly where, and we are prepared to compensate you generously for your assistance." Marcus's mind raced. He genuinely did not know the estate's location. He had handed Elena over to strangers in the dead of night and had not asked where they were taking her, too relieved by the payment to consider anything beyond his own immediate circumstances. But admitting complete ignorance to whoever was calling felt dangerous, an admission that he had nothing left to offer that might keep him safe. "I don't have that information," he said carefully, "but perhaps I can find it. Give me time." "Time," the voice repeated, "is a luxury none of us currently possess. You have 3 days, Mr. Hale. After that, we will assume you have chosen not to cooperate, and we will proceed accordingly." The call ended abruptly, leaving Marcus staring at his phone with trembling hands. 3 days to find information he had no idea how to obtain, or face consequences he could only imagine with growing dread. He poured himself another drink, the 3rd of the morning, and tried to think clearly through the fog of fear clouding his judgment. He thought of the men who had come to his office 2 days earlier, warning him of exactly this kind of danger. Perhaps they had been trying to help him, in their own strange way, preparing him for threats they knew were coming. Perhaps he should have listened more carefully, instead of dismissing their warnings as simple intimidation. His phone buzzed again, and this time it was a message rather than a call, a photograph, attached with no accompanying text. Marcus opened it with trembling fingers, and felt his stomach drop entirely. It showed his own house, his own front door, taken from a distance that suggested careful surveillance, rather than a casual passing glance. They knew where he lived. They had always known, and the photograph was simply a reminder that whatever safety he believed he still possessed was entirely an illusion. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, and began pacing the length of his office, trying to think of anyone who might help him navigate a situation so far beyond anything he had ever encountered in his career. He had built his life around careful business decisions, calculated risks with predictable outcomes. Nothing in his experience had prepared him for the reality that he had unknowingly stepped into a war between powers far beyond his understanding. He thought, briefly, of trying to contact the estate where Elena had been taken, of somehow warning her, or perhaps seeking protection for himself, in exchange for whatever loyalty he could offer. The thought of facing her again, after the way he had treated her, filled him with an uncomfortable mixture of shame and desperation. He pushed the feeling aside quickly, unwilling to examine it too closely. Instead, he called his lawyer, a man named Gerald who had handled his business affairs for years and possessed connections throughout the city that occasionally proved useful in difficult situations. "Marcus," Gerald answered, his tone immediately cautious. "I've been hearing strange rumors about you. People are asking questions I don't have answers to." "I need help," Marcus said, dropping any pretense of composure. "I'm in serious trouble, Gerald, and I don't know where else to turn." "What kind of trouble?" Marcus hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal, even to someone he had trusted for years. "I sold something," he finally said, "that turned out to be far more valuable than I understood at the time. Now there are people demanding information I don't have, threatening consequences if I fail to provide it." Gerald was quiet for a long moment. "Marcus, I need you to be completely honest with me. Are we talking about the kind of trouble that involves normal business rivals, or something else entirely?" "Something else," Marcus admitted quietly. "Something I don't fully understand myself." "Then I think," Gerald said carefully, "that I am not the right person to help you. I have heard whispers, Marcus, about a world existing beneath the surface of ordinary business, powerful families and old rivalries that most people never encounter directly. If you have somehow found yourself entangled with such people, my legal expertise will do you very little good." "So what am I supposed to do?" Marcus demanded, panic rising sharply in his voice. "I honestly don't know," Gerald admitted, "but I would suggest, if you have any way of reaching whoever currently protects the woman you sold, that you consider throwing yourself entirely on their mercy. From what little I understand of these matters, they may be your only realistic source of protection at this point." The suggestion hung in the air long after Gerald ended the call, and Marcus found himself staring at his own reflection in the darkened office window, seeing a man he barely recognized. 3 days ago, he had believed himself clever, resourceful, someone capable of solving any problem through careful negotiation and financial leverage. Now he understood, with a clarity that terrified him, that he had made himself a target within a world that operated by rules he did not comprehend and could not hope to navigate alone. He thought of Elena again, of the years she had spent as his unwanted wife, enduring his coldness and his constant preoccupation with wealth and status. He had never once considered what her life might have been like before their marriage, had never bothered to ask about her childhood or her family beyond the debts she represented. Now, faced with the possibility that he might lose everything, including his own life, he found himself desperately wishing he had shown her even a fraction of the kindness she had likely always deserved. The office phone rang again, startling him badly. He answered cautiously, half expecting another threatening voice from the shadows now closing in around him. "Mr. Hale," a familiar voice said, calm and measured. It was one of the 2 men who had visited his office days earlier. "I trust you've had time to consider your situation." "I have," Marcus said, his voice hoarse. "I don't know anything useful. I truly don't know where Elena was taken." "We are aware of that," the man said, surprising Marcus considerably. "Our sources indicate you genuinely lack the information others seem to believe you possess. Nevertheless, your continued existence remains inconvenient to certain parties who would prefer loose ends eliminated entirely." Marcus's breath caught in his throat. "Are you threatening me?" "I am informing you," the man corrected, "that we may be your only realistic chance of survival in the coming days. Our employer has taken a personal interest in ensuring the situation surrounding Elena Voss resolves without unnecessary complications. Cooperation with us would be considerably wiser than continuing to face this alone." "What kind of cooperation?" Marcus asked warily. "We will discuss the details in person," the man said. "A car will arrive at your office within the hour. I would strongly suggest you be ready to leave when it does. The call ended, leaving Marcus alone once more, with his fear and his rapidly diminishing options. He glanced around his office, the space he had once considered a symbol of everything he had achieved through years of careful, calculated ambition, and understood with sudden, devastating clarity that none of it mattered anymore. The wealth, the status, the careful reputation he had built, all of it meant nothing, in a world where forces far more powerful than himself were now deciding whether he lived or died. He thought once more of Elena, wondering if she had found safety within whatever world she now belonged to, wondering if she ever thought of him at all beyond the bitter memory of the night he had handed her away like an unwanted possession. Whatever fate awaited him in the coming hour, Marcus understood, with a bitter and belated clarity, that the fortune he had gained from selling her had already cost him something he could never fully calculate. Outside his window, a black car pulled quietly to the curb, and Marcus watched it with a growing sense of dread, understanding that whatever came next would determine not simply his fortune, but very likely his survival. The ride was silent, the same two men flanking him in the back seat as the city passed by in a blur of afternoon light. Marcus tried to memorize the route, some instinct telling him it might matter later, but the driver took so many turns through unfamiliar streets that he quickly lost any sense of direction entirely. They arrived at a building far less imposing than Marcus had expected, a modest office tucked between two larger structures downtown, its windows dark, and its entrance unmarked by any sign. Inside, he was led to a small conference room, where a woman waited, dressed in a simple gray suit, her expression unreadable, as she gestured for him to sit. "Mr. Hale," she said, "thank you for agreeing to speak with us." "I wasn't given much choice," Marcus said, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. "Perhaps not," the woman acknowledged, "but I promise you, the alternative to this conversation would have been considerably less pleasant. My name is not important. What matters is that I represent an organization dedicated to maintaining balance among the various powerful families operating within this region, families you have unwittingly stumbled into the middle of. I just want this to be over," Marcus admitted. "I want to go back to my life." "I understand the sentiment," the woman said, not unkindly. "Unfortunately, that particular door has closed behind you. The moment you sold Elena Voss, you became a figure of interest to every faction currently maneuvering for position within a power struggle that has quietly simmered for 18 years. Some believe you know more than you actually do. Others simply see you as a loose thread that might unravel carefully constructed secrets if left unattended." Marcus felt his chest tighten with renewed fear. "So, what happens to me now?" "That depends largely on your cooperation," the woman said. "We are prepared to offer you protection, a new identity, relocation to somewhere far removed from the dangers currently circling you. In exchange, we require complete honesty about every detail surrounding the transaction, including the exact identity of the intermediaries who arranged the payment on Calder's behalf." Marcus spent the next hour recounting everything he could remember, every detail of the men who had come to his door, the specific wording of the agreement, the account information where the payment had been deposited. The woman listened without interruption, occasionally making brief notes, her expression giving away nothing of her thoughts. When he finished, she studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "You understand, Mr. Hale, that the woman you sold is not simply valuable. She represents the missing piece in a conflict that has shaped power throughout this entire region for nearly 2 decades. Her return changes everything, for everyone, including people you have never met and will likely never encounter directly." "I never wanted any of this," Marcus said quietly. "I only wanted to solve my financial problems. Many terrible decisions begin with simple, understandable desires," the woman said. "That does not erase their consequences. Whatever protection we offer you moving forward, I suggest you spend considerable time reflecting on the choice you made that night, and the person you sacrificed to make it." The words stung more than Marcus expected, cutting through the fear and self-pity that had consumed him for days. For the first time since selling Elena away, he allowed himself to fully consider the weight of what he had done, not simply the danger it now brought to his own life, but the fundamental cruelty of treating another human being as nothing more than a transaction to solve his own problems. "Will she be safe?" he found himself asking. "Elena, is she safe where she is now?" The woman's expression softened, just slightly, as safe as anyone can be, given the circumstances surrounding her. Perhaps safer than she has been in years, if the reports I have received are accurate. Whatever guilt you carry, Mr. Hale, know that she has found herself among people genuinely committed to her protection, which is considerably more than you ever offered her. Marcus absorbed the quiet condemnation without argument, understanding that he had earned every bit of it. The woman rose from her seat, indicating the conversation had reached its conclusion. "We will arrange your relocation within the next several days," she said. "Until then, remain in a secure location and avoid any contact with your usual associates. The less visible you remain, the safer you will be." As the two men escorted him back toward the waiting car, Marcus found himself thinking, unexpectedly, of the early days of his marriage to Elena, before ambition and desperation had hollowed him out entirely. He remembered, faintly, a version of himself capable of kindness, capable of caring about someone beyond what they could offer him financially. That man felt impossibly distant now, buried beneath years of calculated decisions that had led him, ultimately, to this moment of fear and consequence. Whatever new life awaited him in hiding, Marcus understood that the fortune he had gained from selling Elena away had cost him something far more valuable than money, a piece of himself he was not entirely certain he would ever manage to reclaim. Elena woke gasping, her heart pounding, as though she had been running for miles, though she had done nothing but sleep. The dream had felt more real than any she had experienced before, her mother's voice singing softly, in a language that somehow made perfect sense within the dream, though she could not recall a single word of it, now that she was awake. She sat up in bed, the early morning light filtering through the curtains, and pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to steady her racing thoughts. Nearly a week had passed since the council confirmed her identity, a week filled with more revelations and more danger than she had experienced in her entire previous life combined. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts, and Nora entered with her usual quiet efficiency, though something in her expression suggested urgency beneath the calm exterior. "Miss Voss, Damien has asked that you join him in the training hall this morning, whenever you're ready." "Training hall?" Elena asked, confused. "I wasn't aware there was one." "There are many parts of this estate you haven't yet seen," Nora said with the hint of a smile. "Given everything happening around you, Damien believes it's time you began learning to protect yourself, rather than relying entirely on others." The idea unsettled Elena slightly, though she recognized the wisdom behind it. She had spent her entire life feeling powerless, first as an orphan shuffled between distant relatives, then as an unwanted wife trapped in a loveless marriage. The thought of learning to defend herself, to claim some measure of control over her own safety, held an appeal she had not expected to feel so strongly. She dressed quickly in simple, practical clothing Nora had left for her, and made her way through the winding hallways toward the section of the estate she had not yet explored. The training hall, when she finally found it, was larger than she had imagined, a vast open space with high ceilings and walls lined with equipment she did not recognize. Damien stood waiting near the center of the room, dressed differently than she had seen him before, in loose, comfortable clothing that suggested physical exertion, rather than the formal attire he typically wore. He turned as she entered, and something in his expression shifted, warm and genuine, in a way that made her chest tighten unexpectedly. "Good morning," he said. "I hope you slept well." "Honestly, not particularly," Elena admitted. "I keep having the same dream. My mother, singing something I can never quite remember once I wake up." Something flickered across Damien's face, curiosity mixed with careful consideration. That's not uncommon among those who carry strong bloodline connections, particularly once their true identity has been confirmed through ritual. Your body and mind are beginning to reconnect with instincts and memories that were suppressed for most of your life. Suppressed how? "When your mother sent you away," Damien explained, "she used old methods to help you blend seamlessly into the ordinary world, methods that essentially quieted the parts of yourself connected to this hidden world we belong to. Now that you know the truth, now that the ritual has confirmed your bloodline publicly, those suppressed instincts are beginning to awaken." Elena considered this, thinking of the strange sensitivity she had noticed over the past week, sounds she could hear more clearly than before, a subtle awareness of movement and presence that seemed to have sharpened considerably since her arrival at the estate. Is that why everything feels different lately? Sharper, somehow? Exactly, Damien said, clearly pleased by her observation. Your senses are awakening gradually, along with certain physical capabilities that come naturally to those of your bloodline. Today, we begin helping you understand and control these changes, rather than simply experiencing them as confusing, uncontrolled sensations. He led her through a series of exercises, starting with simple breathing techniques meant to help her center her awareness and distinguish between ordinary sensory input and the heightened perceptions now developing within her. Elena found the process both exhilarating and exhausting, discovering capabilities within herself she had never imagined possible. Close your eyes, Damien instructed after nearly an hour of preliminary exercises. Focus on the sounds around you, not simply what you hear consciously, but everything present in this room, no matter how faint. Elena closed her eyes, concentrating carefully, and slowly became aware of sounds she had not noticed before. The faint hum of the building's old pipes somewhere beneath the floor, the distant chirping of birds outside despite the thick stone walls, even the steady rhythm of Damien's breathing several feet away from her. I can hear your heartbeat, she said, surprised by her own words the moment they left her mouth. Good, Damien said, his voice carrying genuine approval. That level of sensory awareness typically takes months to develop naturally. You're progressing remarkably quickly. They continued through the morning, moving from sensory exercises into basic physical training, simple movements meant to help Elena understand her body's new capabilities without overwhelming her entirely. She found herself moving with surprising grace and speed, reactions coming more quickly than she consciously processed them, as though some deeper instinct guided her movements beyond conscious thought. This feels impossible, she said breathlessly, after successfully avoiding a series of movements Damien directed toward her, testing her reflexes. A week ago, I could barely manage a full day without exhaustion. Now I feel like an entirely different person. You are becoming who you were always meant to be, Damien said, something soft entering his voice as he watched her. The woman your parents always knew you would grow into, even if circumstances prevented you from discovering it until now. Their eyes met across the training hall, and for a moment, the air between them felt charged, with something neither had fully acknowledged since her arrival. Elena found herself studying the careful way Damien observed her, protective yet respectful, patient yet clearly invested in her success beyond simple duty. Can I ask you something personal? She said, breaking the silence. Of course. You said my father saved your life once. What actually happened? Damien's expression grew distant, memory pulling him somewhere far from the present moment. I was young, barely more than a boy, when my own family fell victim to a rival faction, seeking to expand their territory through violence rather than negotiation. Your father intervened personally, at considerable risk to himself, and afterward, he took me under his protection, taught me everything I know about honor, about loyalty, about the true responsibilities that come with power. He sounds like he was a remarkable man. He was, Damien said quietly, which makes his disappearance, and everything that followed, all the more difficult to accept. I have spent years searching for answers, for some trace of what truly happened to him, and finding you feels like the closest I have come to honoring the debt I owe him. Elena felt a wave of gratitude toward this man, who had dedicated so much of his life to a cause connected to her family, a cause that had nothing to do with personal gain, and everything to do with genuine devotion and loyalty. Thank you, she said again, meaning it more deeply than she had the first time she offered the same words, for everything you've sacrificed to bring me here, to keep me safe. You don't need to thank me, Damien said, his voice carrying an intensity that made her breath catch slightly. Protecting you is not a burden, Elena. It has become, over these past days, something I find myself wanting to do, for reasons that go beyond simple duty to your father's memory. The admission hung between them, quiet and significant, before Damien seemed to catch himself, stepping back slightly and clearing his throat. Forgive me. We should continue your training. There's still much you need to learn, and time may be more limited than we would like. Elena nodded, though something warm lingered in her chest from his unfinished admission, a feeling she was not entirely certain how to name yet, given everything else demanding her attention and energy. They continued training through the remainder of the morning, and Elena found herself growing increasingly confident with each new exercise, her body responding to Damien's instructions with a fluidity that surprised them both. By the time they finally paused for a midday break, she felt genuinely exhausted but also strangely exhilarated, having glimpsed, for the first time, the true extent of capabilities she had never known she possessed. "You did remarkably well today," Damien said, as they walked together toward the estate's dining hall. "Most people require weeks to reach the level of control you demonstrated within a single morning." "I suppose I have considerable motivation," Elena said. "Understanding that dangerous people are actively searching for me tends to focus one's attention rather effectively." Damien's expression sobered slightly at the reminder of the very real threats surrounding her. Speaking of which, Ronan's investigation into the security breach has turned up some concerning information. He believes he may have identified the source of the leak within our own household. Elena's stomach tightened. "Who?" "He's not entirely certain yet," Damien admitted, "but he suspects someone among the household staff has been passing information to outside parties, possibly without fully understanding the significance of what they were sharing. We're conducting a careful, quiet investigation, hoping to identify the source before alerting them that we're aware of the breach. Do you think it could be connected to Victor Crane?" "It's possible," Damien said, "though we have no direct evidence linking him to the breach yet. I would prefer not to make accusations without solid proof, particularly against someone holding as much influence within the council as Victor currently possesses." Their conversation was interrupted by Ronan himself, approaching quickly through the hallway with an expression that immediately signaled urgent news. "Damien, we need to speak privately." "Immediately." Damien glanced at Elena apologetically, before following Ronan a short distance away, though Elena's newly heightened senses allowed her to catch fragments of their hushed conversation, despite the distance separating them. She heard the words traitor and confirmed, and something about a message intercepted just that morning. When Damien returned to her side, his expression had grown noticeably more serious. "Elena, I need you to trust me completely for what happens next. We may have identified our traitor, but exposing them prematurely could put you in even greater danger than you currently face. I need you to continue your normal routine, to act as though nothing unusual is happening, while we carefully gather the evidence necessary to confront them safely. You want me to pretend everything is fine, while a traitor moves freely through this house?" Elena asked, unable to keep the disbelief from her voice. "I know it's difficult," Damien said gently, "but rushing this could give them the opportunity to escape, or worse, to alert whoever they've been working with, before we can properly protect you. Please, Elena, a little more patience, and I promise we will resolve this situation completely." Elena studied his face, searching for any hint of the same careful diplomacy Victor Crane had displayed during the council meeting, but found only genuine concern and determination. Whatever trust she had begun building with Damien over the past week, she understood that continuing to rely on that trust now mattered more than ever. "All right," she said finally, "I'll trust you. But please, Damien, don't keep me in the dark longer than absolutely necessary. I've spent enough of my life being kept in the dark about things that directly affect my own safety." "I promise," Damien said, meeting her eyes with quiet sincerity. "As soon as we have confirmed proof, you will know everything." As they finished their meal in the dining hall, the conversation had shifted to lighter topics, though Elena could sense the underlying tension that remained between them, the weight of secrets not yet fully shared. She found herself watching the household staff moving quietly around them, wondering which familiar, friendly face might actually be working against her, gathering information for enemies she had not yet even identified. That evening, alone in her room, Elena found herself once again drawn to the window, staring out at the darkened gardens below, thinking of the dream that had haunted her sleep the previous night. Her mother's voice, singing something just beyond the edge of memory, felt like it was trying to tell her something important, something she desperately needed to understand, before the danger surrounding her grew any closer. She closed her eyes, focusing on the strange, heightened awareness Damien had helped her discover that morning, and for just a moment, thought she could almost hear the melody again, faint and distant, carried on some current of memory buried deep within her own blood. Whatever secrets remained hidden throughout this estate, whatever traitor moved quietly among the trusted faces surrounding her, Elena understood that she was no longer the powerless woman who had been sold away by her husband less than 2 weeks earlier. She was becoming someone new, someone stronger, and whatever challenges awaited her in the coming days, She intended to face them not as a victim, but as the rightful heir finally beginning to understand the true extent of her own strength. Sleep did not come easily that night. Elena tossed beneath the heavy blankets, her mind cycling endlessly through the day's revelations, the thrill of discovering her own strength tangled together with the unsettling knowledge that someone within these walls could not be trusted. Eventually, unable to bear the restlessness any longer, she rose and wrapped a robe around herself, deciding a walk through the quiet halls might help settle her thoughts. The estate felt different at night, shadows stretching long across the polished floors, the usual bustle of daytime activity, replaced by a heavy, watchful silence. Elena moved quietly, her newly sharpened senses picking up small sounds she would never have noticed before, the settling of old wood, the distant call of some night bird beyond the windows, the soft murmur of voices from somewhere deeper within the house. Curiosity pulled her toward the voices, and she followed the sound carefully, staying close to the walls the way Damien had shown her that morning, moving with a quiet grace that felt entirely natural despite how recently she had learned it. She found herself near the small study where Elder Miriam had spoken with them days earlier, the door slightly ajar, light spilling out in a narrow golden line across the hallway floor. Two voices drifted from within, one belonging to a household staff member she recognized but could not immediately name, and another she did not recognize at all, low and urgent, carrying an accent that suggested someone unfamiliar with the estate. "Cannot keep stalling," the unfamiliar voice was saying. "They grow impatient, and impatience makes people careless. I need the security schedule updated by tomorrow, or the arrangement ends entirely." "I've told you, it's becoming more difficult," the staff member replied, his voice tight with obvious anxiety. "Ronan has increased oversight since the breach. If I'm caught, everything I've built here disappears." "Your concerns are not my concern," the unfamiliar voice said coldly. "You accepted payment for a service. I expect that service delivered, regardless of the increased difficulty." Elena's heart pounded as she pressed herself carefully against the wall, straining to hear every word, while remaining hidden from view. This was the traitor Damien and Ronan had been searching for, and she had stumbled upon direct evidence of the betrayal, entirely by accident. "What exactly do they want with her?" the staff member asked, his voice dropping lower still. "The girl. Elena. What's the actual plan?" "That is not information you require," the unfamiliar voice said sharply. "Your only concern is providing the access requested. What happens afterward is not your business." Elena felt a chill spread through her entire body. Whatever plan was unfolding against her, this staff member, someone she had likely passed in the hallways without a second thought, someone who perhaps had smiled politely while serving her meals, was actively working to enable it. She needed to find Damien immediately, to share what she had overheard before the conversation ended, and the opportunity to catch them together disappeared entirely. Carefully, she began backing away from the door, moving as silently as she could manage. A floorboard creaked beneath her weight, the sound seeming impossibly loud in the quiet hallway. The voices inside the study fell instantly silent. Elena froze, her heart hammering against her ribs, calculating desperately whether to run or remain perfectly still. Before she could decide, the study door swung open fully, revealing the staff member's pale, startled face staring directly at her. "Miss Voss," he said, his voice strained with poorly concealed panic. "I didn't realize anyone else was awake at this hour." "I couldn't sleep," Elena said, forcing calm into her voice despite the fear racing through her. "I was simply taking a walk." The man's eyes flickered nervously toward the study behind him, clearly uncertain whether she had overheard anything significant. Elena maintained careful neutrality in her expression, drawing on instincts she did not fully understand yet possessed, some inherited capacity for calm deception that felt both foreign and natural at once. "Well," the man said, "you should return to your room. It's not entirely safe wandering the halls alone at this hour, given recent events." "Of course," Elena said. "Good night." She turned and walked away deliberately slowly, resisting every instinct urging her to run, until she rounded the corner out of the man's sight. Then she moved quickly, silently, back toward the wing, where she knew Damien's quarters were located, her mind racing through everything she had overheard. She found Ronan first, standing watch near the main staircase, and quickly relayed everything, watching his expression shift from surprise to grim satisfaction as she described the conversation in careful detail. "You've done exactly what we needed," Ronan said. "That confirms our suspicions completely. I'll wake Damien immediately." Within minutes, the household staff member was quietly apprehended, his protests of innocence falling apart quickly, once confronted with Elena's detailed account of the overheard conversation. Damien arrived just as Ronan finished securing the man, his expression a mixture of relief and lingering concern as he found Elena waiting nearby. "Are you all right?" he asked immediately, studying her carefully for any sign of harm. "I'm fine," Elena assured him. "Frightened, honestly, but fine. I couldn't sleep, and I happened to overhear exactly the kind of conversation you and Ronan were searching for." "You shouldn't have approached that situation alone," Damien said, though his tone carried more relief than actual reprimand. "If you had been discovered while they were still speaking freely, the consequences could have been considerably more dangerous." "I know," Elena admitted, "but I'm glad I did it anyway. At least now you have real proof, rather than simply suspicion." Damien studied her for a long moment, something complicated passing across his features. "You continue to surprise me, Elena. Most people in your position would have simply retreated to safety at the first sign of danger. Instead, you gathered exactly the information we needed." "I suppose I'm tired of being someone things happen to," Elena said quietly. "I would rather be someone who does something about the danger surrounding her, even if that means taking risks." Something warm flickered in Damien's pale eyes, admiration mixed with an emotion Elena was beginning to recognize, despite her limited experience with such feelings. "Your father would be immensely proud of the woman you've become," he said softly. As household staff led the captured traitor away for questioning, and Ronan began the careful work of tracing exactly who he had been reporting to, Elena felt a fragile sense of relief settle over her, tempered by the understanding that catching one traitor did not necessarily mean the danger surrounding her had passed entirely. Whoever the unfamiliar voice belonged to, whoever truly orchestrated the threats gathering against her, remained hidden, waiting for their next opportunity. But for tonight, at least, she had proven something important to herself, and perhaps to Damien as well. She was no longer the frightened, powerless woman who had been sold away in the darkness less than 2 weeks earlier. She was becoming someone capable of facing danger directly, someone worthy of the legacy she was only just beginning to understand. The interrogation room was cold, and Elena stood behind a one-way mirror beside Damien, watching the captured staff member, now identified as a man named Perry, sit hunched across from Ronan, his earlier bravado completely gone. "Who were you reporting to?" Ronan asked, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. "I don't know his real name," Perry said, his hands trembling on the table. "He contacted me through an intermediary, offered enough money to clear debts I'd carried for years. I didn't know what any of it truly meant. I swear it." "You knew enough to hide it," Ronan said. "You knew enough to hide it, our security schedules, and report on Elena's movements throughout this estate. That's considerably more than accidental involvement." Elena watched the exchange with a strange, detached focus, still processing the reality that this man, someone she had spoken to casually, someone who had served her meals and never once raised her suspicion, had been quietly working to enable whatever danger circled her. "What did they want with the security schedule specifically?" Damien asked through the small speaker connecting to the interrogation room. Perry's eyes flicked toward the mirror, as though he could somehow sense Damien's presence beyond it. "They wanted to know the best window of opportunity, when patrols would be thinnest, when the household would be most distracted." "For what purpose?" "I genuinely don't know," Perry insisted. "They never told me the full plan. I only provided information in exchange for payment. I never wanted anyone hurt." Ronan continued pressing for details, but Perry's answers remained frustratingly incomplete, suggesting he truly had been kept in the dark about the larger scheme he had unwittingly enabled. Eventually, Damien stepped away from the mirror, gesturing for Elena to follow him into the hallway. "We'll continue questioning him," Damien said, "but I don't believe he knows much more than what he's already shared. Whoever is orchestrating this has been careful to keep their operatives compartmentalized, each knowing only enough to complete their specific task." "That suggests someone experienced," Elena said. Someone who understands exactly how to protect themselves from exposure. Exactly, Damien agreed, his expression grim. Which brings us back to considering who among the council possesses that kind of experience and resources. Elder Miriam found them in the hallway, her expression grave as she approached. I've heard about tonight's discovery. This confirms what I feared most, that the betrayal your mother spoke of 18 years ago never truly ended. Whoever orchestrated your father's downfall has continued operating within these walls all this time, patient enough to wait for exactly this moment. I need to understand everything, Elena said firmly. Not fragments, not careful hints, meant to protect me from difficult truths. Tell me exactly what happened to my father, from the beginning. Elder Miriam glanced at Damien, who nodded slowly, apparently agreeing that the time for careful protection had passed. Come, the elder said. This conversation deserves privacy and proper context. They gathered in the same small study where Elena's identity had first been discussed, Elder Miriam settling into a worn armchair, while Damien and Elena took seats across from her, the weight of anticipation heavy in the room. Your father inherited leadership during a difficult period, Elder Miriam began. Several powerful families had grown accustomed to operating with considerable independence during his own father's declining years. When Gideon assumed full authority, he moved quickly to restore proper order, reclaiming territories and enforcing agreements that some families had begun ignoring entirely. That created enemies, Elena said. Naturally, Elder Miriam confirmed, but your father was skilled, and more importantly, he was fair. Even those who resented losing their expanded influence generally respected his judgment and his commitment to protecting the wider community, rather than simply consolidating personal power. For years, his rule remained stable, despite quiet resentment simmering beneath the surface. What changed? Damien asked, though Elena suspected he already knew much of this history and was allowing the elder to share it fully for Elena's benefit. Your mother's pregnancy, Elder Miriam said. The birth of a true heir, particularly one bearing such a clear mark of legitimate bloodline, solidified your father's claim to leadership in a way that eliminated any realistic path for rival families to challenge his authority through legitimate means. For those who had been quietly hoping circumstances might eventually shift in their favor, your birth represented the final closing of that door. Elena felt a chill settle over her, understanding now that her very existence had been considered a threat before she was even old enough to comprehend the danger surrounding her. So they decided to remove my father entirely. Not immediately, Elder Miriam said. For the first 2 years of your life, the resentment remained largely hidden, expressed only through careful political maneuvering rather than direct action. Your father governed wisely, and your mother raised you within a household filled with genuine love and protection. I remember visiting during those years, watching your parents together, and believing, foolishly perhaps, that the difficult early years of consolidating power had finally given way to lasting peace. But it didn't last, Elena said quietly. No, Elder Miriam confirmed, sorrow deepening the lines of her weathered face. Eventually, a faction led by several council members, convinced that the current arrangement would forever exclude them from meaningful power, began planning more drastic action. They approached outside interests, families and organizations beyond our immediate community, seeking resources and support in exchange for promises of future cooperation once your father was removed from power. Who were these outside interests? Elena asked. That, Elder Miriam admitted, remains one of the great unanswered questions from that period. Your mother discovered evidence of the plot forming, but she was killed before she could fully expose the conspirators or identify all those involved. Your father, devastated by her death, and understanding the full scope of danger now surrounding both himself and you, made the difficult decision to send you away entirely, believing that removing you from this world completely was the only way to guarantee your survival. And then he disappeared as well, Elena said. Shortly afterward, Elder Miriam confirmed, whether he was killed by his enemies, or whether he chose to disappear voluntarily to avoid leading them toward wherever you had been hidden, no one has ever confirmed with certainty. The throne has remained officially unclaimed ever since, though various factions have quietly maneuvered to expand their influence during the years of uncertainty. Elena absorbed this history slowly, feeling the full weight of the tragedy that had shaped her entire life without her knowledge or consent. And Victor Crane, she said finally, Where does he fit into all of this? Elder Miriam's expression grew carefully guarded. Victor was among your father's most trusted advisors before everything happened. He has always publicly maintained loyalty to the memory of your father's leadership, though his considerable rise in influence during the years of your father's absence has never fully sat comfortably with those of us who remember how things once were. You suspect him, Damien said, not quite a question. I suspect many things I cannot yet prove, Elder Miriam said carefully. Victor has always been skilled at maintaining plausible distance from anything that might implicate him directly, while somehow always benefiting from whatever chaos or uncertainty arises within the council. Whether that pattern reflects genuine political skill or something considerably darker, I cannot say with certainty. Elena felt a fresh determination settling within her, replacing some of the grief and confusion that had accompanied learning her family's tragic history. Then I need to understand exactly what claiming my inheritance actually means. If the throne has remained empty for 18 years, what happens now that I've been confirmed as the legitimate heir? Damien and Elder Miriam exchanged a meaningful glance before Damien answered. It means, Elena, that every faction, currently benefiting from the throne's vacancy, now faces the reality that their comfortable arrangement is ending. Some will support your claim eagerly, hoping to align themselves favorably with the rightful heir. Others will resist fiercely, understanding that your ascension threatens everything they've built during your family's absence. And Victor Crane, Elena said slowly, falls into which category? That, Damien said grimly, is precisely what we need to determine, before he has the opportunity to act against you directly, rather than simply working through hidden intermediaries and quiet betrayals. The conversation continued late into the night, Elder Miriam sharing additional details about the complex political landscape Elena would need to navigate, the various families and their historical allegiances, the delicate balance of power that had developed during the years of uncertainty. Elena found herself absorbing information at a remarkable pace, her newly awakened instincts seeming to make sense of political complexities that would have overwhelmed her entirely just weeks earlier. By the time she finally retired to her room, exhausted but strangely energized by everything she had learned, Elena understood with complete clarity the true scope of what claiming her father's legacy would require. This was not simply about proving her bloodline or learning to control newly discovered physical capabilities. It was about stepping into a role that carried genuine responsibility for the safety and well-being of an entire community, a role that her enemies would fight desperately to prevent her from ever fully claiming. As she settled into bed, her mind still racing with everything she had absorbed, Elena found herself thinking once more of her father, the man in the photograph with sorrowful, intelligent eyes, who had sacrificed everything to protect a daughter he had been forced to send away before she was old enough to remember him. Wherever he was now, whether alive or lost entirely to the tragedy that had reshaped both their lives, Elena silently promised herself that she would honor his legacy by finally claiming the throne he had protected so fiercely, and by exposing whoever had orchestrated the betrayal that had torn their family apart so many years ago. Tomorrow, she would begin the difficult work of understanding exactly how to navigate the treacherous political landscape awaiting her. Tonight, she allowed herself simply to grieve for the parents she had never truly known, and to feel, for the first time since arriving at this strange and dangerous new world, a genuine sense of purpose beginning to take root within her. News of Perry's capture spread through the estate quickly, despite Damien's efforts to keep the matter contained, and by mid-morning, an emergency council session had been called to address the security breach directly. Elena walked into the same chamber where her identity had been confirmed days earlier, feeling considerably more confident than she had during her first appearance, though the tension in the room remained palpable. Victor Crane sat in his usual position at the head of the table, his expression carefully composed, as Damien explained the circumstances surrounding Perry's capture, deliberately omitting Elena's direct involvement in gathering the crucial evidence. A troubling development, Victor said once Damien finished his summary. Though I confess some confusion about how such a breach occurred without detection for what appears to have been a considerable period of time, the investigation remains ongoing, Damien said carefully. We're working to trace exactly who Perry was reporting to, and what larger plan his information gathering was meant to support. I do hope, Victor continued, his tone carrying a subtle edge Elena was learning to recognize, that this unfortunate incident doesn't reflect broader vulnerabilities within our current security arrangements. The Council's confidence in your ability to protect Elena depends considerably on demonstrating competent oversight of exactly these kinds of threats. Elena watched the exchange carefully, noting how skillfully Victor managed to raise doubt about Damien's capabilities while maintaining an outward appearance of simple concern. Whether he was truly the traitor Elder Miriam suspected, or simply a shrewd political operator seeking advantage from any available opportunity, his skill at manipulation was undeniable. Perhaps, Elena said, speaking up before Damien could respond, the Council should focus less on assigning blame for a breach that has now been successfully identified and contained, and more on determining who orchestrated it in the first place. Surely uncovering the true architect of this betrayal matters considerably more than debating security protocols after the fact. A brief silence followed her words, several council members exchanging surprised glances at her direct intervention. Victor's expression flickered, something calculating passing behind his eyes before he offered a thin smile. "Wisely spoken," he said. "Perhaps you're correct, Elena, though I wonder if you have any particular suspicions regarding who might be responsible for orchestrating such a scheme." The question hung in the air, clearly designed to test whether Elena or Damien suspected him directly. Elena held his gaze steadily, drawing on the same instinctive composure she had discovered during her encounter with Perry the previous night. "I trust the investigation to uncover the truth in time," she said carefully. Rushing toward conclusions before gathering complete evidence would serve no one well, particularly if it allowed the true architect of this betrayal to escape proper accountability by hiding behind premature accusations. Something shifted subtly in Victor's expression, and Elena could not quite determine whether it reflected genuine approval of her careful reasoning or quiet relief that suspicion had not yet turned directly toward him. The meeting continued for another hour, discussing additional security measures and formal procedures for expanding the investigation, before finally concluding without any further significant developments. As the council members began filing out of the chamber, Elder Miriam caught Elena's arm gently, guiding her toward a quiet corner. "You handled that beautifully," the elder said quietly. "Your father would have responded with exactly that same careful patience, refusing to be baited into premature accusations, despite obvious provocation." "It didn't feel careful," Elena admitted. "It felt like walking through a room full of people I couldn't trust, trying not to reveal how frightened I actually am." "That is precisely what careful leadership feels like," Elder Miriam said with a gentle smile. "The absence of fear is not what makes someone capable of ruling wisely. It is learning to act with wisdom despite the fear, exactly as you did today." As they left the council chamber together, a young guard approached quickly, his expression carrying news that made Elena's stomach tighten with fresh anxiety. "Damien," the guard said, "there's a situation at the front gate. A man is requesting entry, claiming urgent business regarding Elena Voss." "Who is he?" Damien asked. The guard hesitated slightly before answering. "He says his name is Marcus Hale." Elena felt the blood drain from her face entirely, the name striking her like a physical blow despite the distance and time that had separated her from her former husband over the past several weeks. Whatever business had brought Marcus to the estate gates, she understood immediately that this confrontation, whenever it finally occurred, would be far more complicated than any political maneuvering she had faced within the council chamber. "What does he want?" she asked, surprised by how steady her voice remained despite the storm of emotions suddenly churning within her. "He wouldn't say precisely," the guard admitted, "only that it concerned your safety, and that he needed to speak with you directly." Damien's expression had grown protective and wary in equal measure. "Elena, you're under no obligation to see him. I can have him turned away immediately if that's your preference." Elena considered this carefully, weighing her lingering anger and hurt against genuine curiosity about what could possibly bring Marcus to her doorstep after everything that had happened between them. Whatever business he claimed, she suspected the true reason involved considerably more desperation than simple concern for her well-being. "No," she said finally. "I'll see him. I think it's time I finally understood exactly what kind of trouble he's found himself in, and whether it poses any actual threat to everything we've been working to protect." Damien studied her carefully, clearly wanting to argue, but respecting her decision nonetheless. "Very well, but I'll be present throughout the conversation, and Ronan will maintain security precautions, regardless of Marcus's claimed intentions. As they made their way toward the estate's main entrance, Elena felt a complicated mixture of emotions building within her. Anger at the man who had so casually discarded her, curiosity about what circumstances could have driven him to seek her out directly, and beneath it all, a strange, hollow sense of finality, as though this confrontation would mark the true end of the ordinary life she had left behind so abruptly weeks earlier. Whatever Marcus wanted, Elena understood that she was no longer the frightened, powerless woman he had once controlled so completely. She was ready, finally, to face him as exactly who she had become. Marcus stood at the estate gates, flanked by two guards who watched him with open suspicion, his once immaculate appearance now noticeably disheveled. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his hands trembled slightly as he waited, a man who had clearly spent recent days consumed by fear, rather than his usual confident ambition. When Elena appeared at the top of the entrance stairs, flanked by Damien and Ronan, Marcus's expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession: relief, shame, and something that looked almost like desperate hope. "Elena," he said, taking a step forward before Ronan's raised hand stopped him firmly in place. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. I wasn't certain you would." "I almost didn't," Elena said, her voice steady, despite the storm of emotions churning within her chest. "What do you want, Marcus?" He glanced nervously at Damien and Ronan before answering, clearly uncomfortable discussing whatever brought him here in front of witnesses. "Could we speak privately, please? It's important." "Anything you need to say, you can say in front of them," Elena replied firmly. "I don't have secrets from the people protecting me anymore, Marcus. That particular arrangement ended the night you sold me away." Marcus flinched visibly at her words, though he did not argue the point. "Fair enough," he said quietly. "I've made terrible mistakes, Elena. I understand that now more clearly than I ever have before. I came here because I'm in serious danger, and because I finally understand what I actually did when I sold you to those men." "And what exactly do you believe you understand?" Elena asked, crossing her arms, unwilling to make this easy for him, despite the genuine desperation evident in his voice and posture. "That you're not simply my unwanted wife," Marcus said. "That you're someone important, someone powerful people have been searching for. I didn't know that when I made the arrangement. I want you to believe that, even if nothing else I say matters to you. Whether you knew or not doesn't erase what you did," Elena said, her voice hardening. "You looked at me, the woman you had been married to for 3 years, and you saw nothing but an obstacle to solve, a debt to eliminate. Ignorance doesn't excuse cruelty, Marcus." Marcus lowered his eyes, unable to meet her gaze directly. "You're right. I have no excuse that would make what I did acceptable. I've spent the past several days facing consequences I never imagined, threats from people I don't fully understand, and through all of it, I've had considerable time to reflect on exactly the kind of man I allowed myself to become." "Why are you telling me this?" Elena asked. "What do you actually want from me, Marcus? Forgiveness? Protection? Money?" "I want," Marcus said carefully, "to warn you, and perhaps, if you're willing, to offer whatever assistance I can provide, in exchange for some measure of safety. I don't expect forgiveness, Elena. I don't believe I deserve it. But I have information you might find useful, about the people who are searching for you." Damien stepped forward slightly, his expression carefully neutral, though Elena could sense the protective tension radiating from him. "What kind of information?" Marcus glanced at Damien before continuing. "2 men approached me shortly after the transaction, working for a man named Calder, who arranged the initial payment. They demanded information about Elena's location, threatened consequences if I failed to provide it. I didn't know where she had been taken, and I told them so, but they didn't seem entirely convinced." "And what happened after that?" Elena asked, despite herself, curious about the events that had clearly left Marcus so visibly shaken. "Another group contacted me," Marcus continued. "They claimed to represent some kind of organization dedicated to maintaining balance among powerful families, offering protection in exchange for cooperation. I told them everything I knew, which admittedly wasn't much. They're planning to relocate me somewhere safe, provide a new identity, but I wanted to see you first, to make certain you understood the danger you're facing before I disappeared entirely." Elena absorbed this information carefully, understanding that despite everything Marcus had done, the information he provided might genuinely prove valuable in understanding the full scope of threats surrounding her. Tell me everything you remember about these men working for Calder. Their appearance, anything they said that might identify who they truly represent. Marcus spent the next several minutes providing detailed descriptions, and Damien listened intently, occasionally exchanging meaningful glances with Ronan, as certain details emerged that clearly held significance beyond what Marcus himself understood. When he finished, Damien pulled Ronan aside briefly, speaking in tones too low for Elena to overhear clearly despite her improved senses. "This matches patterns we've seen before," Damien said, returning to the conversation. "Calder has connections to several factions within the broader political landscape, including some we've suspected of working against your father's legacy for years. This confirms considerable overlap between the people who purchased you from Marcus and those actively opposing your claim to the throne." Elena turned back to Marcus, studying his face carefully, searching for any trace of manipulation or hidden agenda beneath his apparent sincerity. "Why should I trust anything you're telling me, Marcus? Given everything that's happened, given how easily you discarded me the moment it became financially convenient, why should I believe your sudden concern for my safety is genuine?" Marcus met her gaze directly for the first time since arriving, something raw and honest flickering behind his exhausted eyes. "You shouldn't trust me, Elena. I don't expect you to. Not after what I did. But I'm telling you the truth regardless, because whatever else I am, whatever mistakes I've made, I'm not willing to let harm come to you, without at least trying to help, even if that assistance comes far too late to matter." The sincerity in his voice struck Elena unexpectedly, and despite her lingering anger and hurt, she found herself believing that his warning, at least, carried genuine truth. Whether his motivations stemmed from actual remorse or simple self-preservation, the information he had provided seemed valuable regardless. "What will you do now?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "The people offering protection plan to relocate me somewhere safe, give me a new identity, help me disappear from whatever danger continues circling. I suppose I'll try to build some kind of life, though I doubt it will ever resemble anything close to what I had before all of this began." Elena studied him for a long moment, feeling a strange mixture of emotions she had not expected. Pity, mixed with lingering resentment. Understanding, mixed with the certainty that she could never truly forgive the casual cruelty he had shown her during their marriage, and especially during their final confrontation weeks earlier. "I hope you find whatever peace you're searching for," she said finally, her voice softer than before, but still carrying clear finality. "But I won't pretend that what happened between us can simply be forgotten, because you finally recognized the consequences of your actions. You made a choice, Marcus. You looked at me and decided I was worth less than the money those men offered. That choice will always define what happened between us, regardless of whatever regret you feel now." Marcus nodded slowly, accepting her words without argument. "I understand. I don't expect anything different from you, Elena. I only wanted you to know the truth, and to warn you about the danger surrounding you, in whatever small way I still could." "Thank you for the warning," Elena said. "And Marcus, I do hope you find safety. Genuinely. Despite everything, I don't wish harm upon you." Something that looked almost like grief passed across Marcus's face, perhaps recognizing in her words the final closing of a door that had once represented his entire life. "Goodbye, Elena," he said quietly. "I truly am sorry, for whatever that's worth now." He turned and walked back toward the waiting car, and Elena watched him go, feeling the strange, complicated weight of finally releasing something she had not fully realized she was still carrying. Whatever connection had once existed between them, however damaged and ultimately broken, had reached its true conclusion in this final exchange. As the car pulled away from the estate gates, disappearing down the long driveway and beyond the iron gates shaped like a wolf's head, Damien approached her quietly, his expression carefully gauging her emotional state. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I think so," Elena said, surprised to find the answer largely true. "It's strange. I expected to feel angrier, seeing him again. Instead, I mostly just feel relieved that chapter of my life has finally closed completely." "You handled that with remarkable grace," Damien said. "Considering everything he put you through, your composure just now was genuinely admirable." "I think," Elena said slowly, working through her own thoughts as she spoke them aloud, that I've spent enough energy being angry at Marcus over these past weeks. Whatever he did, whatever consequences he now faces because of his own choices, holding on to that anger indefinitely would only continue giving him power over my life that he no longer deserves to hold. Damien studied her with an expression that carried genuine admiration. Along with something warmer he seemed to be working carefully to keep restrained. Your father would be proud, he said softly. That kind of wisdom, choosing peace over resentment, even when resentment would be entirely justified, is precisely the quality that made him such an effective and respected leader. Elena felt warmth spreading through her chest at the comparison, though beneath the compliment about her father, she noticed the particular way Damien was looking at her now, something that had nothing to do with duty or political calculation. Damien, she said carefully, can I ask you something? Of course. Earlier, in the training hall, you started to say something before stopping yourself, about wanting to protect me for reasons beyond simple duty to my father's memory. What did you mean by that? Damien's expression shifted, careful consideration mixed with something that looked almost like nervousness, an emotion Elena had not previously associated with his generally composed demeanor. I meant, he said slowly, that somewhere during these past weeks, protecting you stopped feeling like an obligation inherited from your father, and started feeling like something I genuinely want to do, for reasons that have everything to do with who you are as a person, and considerably less to do with who your parents were. The admission hung in the air between them, and Elena felt her heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with fear or danger. That's a considerable admission, she said softly. I know, Damien said. And I recognize the timing is far from ideal, given everything surrounding us, the danger, the political complexity, the traitor still potentially operating within these walls. But I've found myself unable to continue pretending my feelings toward you remain purely professional, and I thought you deserved honesty, regardless of how complicated that honesty might make our current circumstances. Elena studied his face carefully, seeing genuine vulnerability beneath his usual careful control, and felt something warm and hopeful blooming within her chest, despite everything else demanding her attention and worry. I appreciate your honesty, she said finally, and I won't pretend I haven't noticed similar feelings developing on my own side, despite trying to focus entirely on more pressing concerns. Something like relief and quiet joy passed across Damien's face, though he maintained careful restraint, clearly understanding that whatever connection was developing between them would need to wait for a more appropriate moment, given the ongoing dangers surrounding them both. Perhaps, he said, once we've resolved the more immediate threats facing us, we might explore this further, without the constant shadow of danger complicating everything between us. I would like that, Elena said, offering him a genuine smile for the first time in what felt like days. As they walked back toward the main estate together, the earlier tension of Marcus's visit gradually giving way to this new, unexpected warmth developing between them, Elena felt a cautious optimism she had not experienced since arriving at this strange new world weeks earlier. Whatever challenges remained ahead, whatever traitors still lurked among the trusted faces surrounding her, she found herself facing the future with considerably more hope than she had believed possible during those first terrifying hours after Marcus handed her away to strangers in the darkness. Behind them, unseen by either Elena or Damien, a figure watched from a distant window overlooking the estate grounds, their expression carefully unreadable as they observed the growing closeness between the returning heir and her devoted protector, calculating exactly how this unexpected development might complicate, or perhaps even benefit, whatever plans continued unfolding in the shadows surrounding them all. That evening, a formal dinner had been arranged to introduce Elena to several extended family members who had traveled considerable distances upon hearing confirmation of her identity. Elena dressed carefully, still adjusting to the strange sensation of being treated as someone significant, someone whose appearance and behavior would be carefully observed and judged by people she had never met. The dining hall had been transformed for the occasion, long tables set with fine china, and candles casting warm light across gathered faces, many of whom studied Elena with open curiosity as she entered alongside Damien. Elder Miriam had briefed her earlier on the various guests expected to attend, distant cousins and allied families who had maintained loyalty to her father's memory throughout the years of uncertainty. Among the guests, one figure immediately drew Elena's attention, a young man perhaps a few years older than herself, with sharp features and calculating eyes that studied her with an intensity that felt less like curiosity and more like careful evaluation. "That's Caleb Voss," Elder Miriam said quietly, noticing the direction of Elena's gaze. "Your cousin, through your father's younger brother. His branch of the family has maintained a complicated relationship with the main line over the years." "Complicated how?" Elena asked. "During your father's absence, some believed Caleb's father should have claimed leadership, given the uncertainty surrounding your own survival," Elder Miriam explained carefully. "Caleb himself has grown considerably ambitious in recent years, cultivating relationships throughout the council that suggest genuine political aspirations of his own." Elena absorbed this information carefully, understanding immediately that Caleb represented another potential complication within the already treacherous political landscape she was learning to navigate. As the dinner progressed, she found herself seated near him, and he wasted little time engaging her directly. "Cousin," he said, his tone carrying careful diplomatic warmth that did not entirely mask the calculation beneath it. "It's remarkable, truly, seeing you here after all these years. The entire family believed you lost forever." "I understand it's been quite a surprise for everyone," Elena said carefully, matching his diplomatic tone while remaining alert to whatever true intentions might lie beneath his pleasant exterior. "A welcome surprise, of course," Caleb continued smoothly. "Though I confess, some of us had grown accustomed to certain arrangements developing during the years of uncertainty. Your return will require considerable adjustment throughout the entire community." "Are you suggesting my return is unwelcome?" Elena asked directly, deciding that meeting his careful diplomacy with equally direct honesty might reveal more about his true feelings than continued polite deflection. Caleb's expression flickered slightly, perhaps surprised by her directness. "Not unwelcome," he said carefully, "merely complicated. My father has served this community faithfully throughout the years. Your father's fate remained uncertain. It would be natural for some to wonder how your return might affect the considerable contributions he has made during that time." The subtext was clear enough, and Elena felt a chill of recognition, understanding that Caleb's family likely harbored genuine resentment about losing whatever influence they had gained during her father's absence. Whether that resentment translated into active danger remained to be seen, but she filed the information away carefully, alongside her growing understanding of the complex political landscape surrounding her. "I hope," Elena said carefully, "that your father's contributions will continue to be valued and recognized, regardless of my return. I have no interest in dismissing the genuine sacrifices people have made during difficult years, Caleb. My goal is simply to honor my father's legacy and protect this community, not to punish those who did their best to maintain stability during uncertain times." Something shifted in Caleb's expression, perhaps genuine consideration of her words, though Elena could not be entirely certain whether his apparent softening reflected true reassurance or simply careful political recalibration. "That's reassuring to hear," he said finally. "I look forward to seeing how your leadership develops, cousin." The remainder of the dinner passed with careful diplomatic conversation, Elena navigating introductions and polite inquiries with growing confidence, drawing on instincts she had not possessed weeks earlier, but which now seemed to flow naturally through her, as though some inherited capacity for careful political navigation had been simply waiting for the opportunity to emerge. Later, as guests began departing and the estate settled into quiet evening stillness, Damien found Elena on the balcony, overlooking the gardens, watching the last of the departing carriages disappear down the long driveway. "You did remarkably well tonight," he said, joining her at the railing. Caleb Voss is not an easy person to navigate diplomatically. His ambitions run deep, though he's skilled at concealing them behind careful courtesy. "Do you think he poses a genuine threat?" Elena asked. "I'm honestly uncertain," Damien admitted. "His family has legitimate grievances about influence, gained and potentially lost during these transitional circumstances. Whether that translates into active danger or simply uncomfortable political friction remains to be determined. I would advise continued caution regardless." Elena nodded, absorbing yet another layer of complexity into her rapidly expanding understanding of the world she now belonged to. "It feels like everyone I meet carries some hidden agenda, some careful calculation about how my presence affects their own ambitions. That's an unfortunate reality of the position you now hold," Damien said gently. "Power, even simply the potential for power, tends to reveal people's true priorities rather quickly. The genuine challenge lies in learning to distinguish between those who might disagree with you politically, while still maintaining fundamental loyalty, and those whose ambitions run deep enough to justify actual betrayal. How do I learn that distinction? Elena asked. Everyone seems capable of concealing their true intentions behind convincing performances of loyalty. Damien considered the question carefully before answering. Time, mostly, and careful attention to actions rather than simply words. Anyone can speak convincingly of loyalty. Far fewer are willing to demonstrate it through genuine sacrifice or risk when circumstances actually demand it. Elena thought of Perry's betrayal, motivated by simple financial desperation rather than genuine political conviction, and wondered how many others throughout this vast, complicated community might harbor similarly hidden vulnerabilities that could be exploited by whoever truly orchestrated the danger surrounding her. "Thank you," she said finally, "for helping me navigate all of this. I genuinely don't know how I would manage without your guidance." "You're managing considerably better than you give yourself credit for," Damien said, something warm entering his voice as he studied her in the soft evening light. "Whatever uncertainty you feel, Elena, I want you to understand that the strength and wisdom you've demonstrated these past weeks reflects who you genuinely are, not simply careful coaching or fortunate circumstance." Elena felt warmth spreading through her chest at his words, and for a moment, standing together on the quiet balcony overlooking the moonlit gardens, the constant weight of political danger and hidden betrayal seemed to fade into the background, replaced by something simpler and considerably more hopeful. Whatever challenges awaited her in the coming days, whatever hidden enemies continued working against her claim to her father's legacy, Elena understood that she was no longer facing these dangers alone. She had found, in this strange and dangerous new world, genuine allies willing to stand beside her, and perhaps, in Damien, something considerably more significant, beginning to take root, despite everything working against it. The scream tore through the estate grounds just before dawn, jolting Elena from sleep, with her heart already racing, before she fully understood what had happened. She threw on a robe and rushed into the hallway, finding Nora pressed against the wall, her face white with shock, staring into an empty guest room, where broken glass littered the floor near the shattered window. "What happened?" Elena demanded, her newly sharpened senses already picking up the metallic scent of blood mixed with something else, something wrong, hanging heavy in the air. "Lady Priscilla," Nora managed, her voice trembling. "One of the visiting council members. She's been attacked. They found her injured near the eastern garden wall, barely conscious." Damien arrived moments later, already dressed and alert despite the early hour, his expression grim as he took in the scene. "Where is she now?" "They've taken her to the medical wing," Nora said. "Ronan is with her, along with Elder Miriam." They hurried toward the medical wing together, and Elena felt her stomach twist with dread as they entered to find Lady Priscilla, an elderly woman Elena had briefly spoken with during the previous evening's dinner, lying pale and injured on a medical bed, her breathing shallow but steady. A physician worked carefully to treat wounds that appeared to have come from some kind of physical attack. "She'll survive," the physician said as they entered, though the attack was clearly deliberate and considerably violent. Whoever assaulted her wanted to send a message, not simply cause injury. "What kind of message?" Damien asked. Ronan stepped forward, his expression tight with barely controlled anger. This was left near where she was found. He held up a small piece of parchment, its edges singed, as though it had been partially burned. Elena leaned forward to read the careful handwriting inscribed upon it. "The lost heir brings only danger to this house. Those who support her false claim will share this same fate." Elena felt the blood drain from her face entirely. "They're saying this happened because of me, because Lady Priscilla supported my claim to the throne." "That appears to be the intended message," Damien confirmed grimly, "though I have serious doubts about its accuracy. This feels less like genuine opposition to your claim, and considerably more like a calculated attempt to turn council opinion against you by making your presence appear dangerous to those around you." "Who would do something so calculated?" Elena asked, though even as she spoke the words, her mind immediately turned toward Victor Crane, and beyond him, toward Caleb Voss, whose careful diplomatic warmth during the previous evening's dinner had barely concealed genuine political ambition. "That," Elder Miriam said grimly, "is exactly what we need to determine, and quickly. before this incident poisons council opinion beyond repair. Word of the attack spread through the estate rapidly, and by midday, an emergency council session had been called, considerably more tense than the previous meeting, addressing Perry's betrayal. Elena entered the chamber to find the atmosphere noticeably colder, several council members regarding her with open suspicion, rather than the cautious curiosity she had grown accustomed to over recent weeks. Victor Crane wasted no time addressing the situation directly. "This latest incident raises serious questions," he said, his tone carefully measured, though the underlying implication was unmistakable. "Since Elena's arrival, this estate has experienced a security breach, a foreign intrusion attempt, and now a violent attack against a respected council member. One begins to wonder whether these escalating dangers are truly coincidental, or whether her presence itself has attracted enemies whose continued targeting places this entire community at risk." Murmurs spread through the gathered council members, and Elena felt the weight of suspicion settling over her like a physical burden. "I understand these incidents appear connected to my return," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice, despite the mounting pressure she felt from every direction. "But I would suggest that the true danger comes not from my presence itself, but from those actively working to prevent my rightful claim to the throne. Attacking Lady Priscilla for supporting me serves no purpose, except to turn this council against a legitimate heir through fear and manipulation." "A convenient interpretation," Victor said smoothly, "though not the only possible explanation. Perhaps your continued presence here genuinely does invite the kind of dangerous attention this community would be better served avoiding entirely." "Are you suggesting Elena should leave?" Damien asked sharply, his controlled composure finally cracking slightly beneath obvious frustration. "I am suggesting," Victor said carefully, "that this council owes it to the safety of everyone within our community to consider all possibilities, including the uncomfortable possibility that the danger surrounding Elena's claim may simply be too great to responsibly ignore." Elena felt panic rising within her chest, understanding that Victor was skillfully maneuvering the council toward rejecting her claim entirely, using fear rather than direct confrontation to accomplish what his earlier attempts at the ritual had failed to achieve. She glanced toward Caleb Voss, seated further down the table, and noticed his careful, neutral expression, giving away nothing of his true thoughts regarding the unfolding discussion. "May I speak?" Elena asked, addressing the full council directly, rather than continuing to argue solely with Victor. The chamber fell silent, and she stood, drawing on every ounce of composure and instinctive authority she had developed over the past weeks of training and difficult political navigation. "I understand the fear circulating through this council," she began. "Danger has followed my return, and that fear is entirely understandable. But consider carefully what accepting Victor's suggestion would actually accomplish. If I leave, if this council rejects my legitimate claim out of fear, you will not eliminate the danger surrounding this community. You will simply hand victory to whoever orchestrated these attacks in the first place, proving that violence and intimidation successfully determine leadership within our world." She paused, looking around the chamber, meeting the eyes of council members one by one, drawing on instincts that felt increasingly natural, despite how recently she had discovered them. "My father governed this community with fairness and strength for years, before his enemies removed him, through exactly this same combination of fear and manipulation. I refuse to allow history to repeat itself, simply because someone has decided that violence against innocent people is an acceptable tool for achieving political goals. If you truly wish to honor my father's legacy, and to protect this community from genuine danger, then help me identify whoever orchestrated tonight's attack, rather than allowing fear to accomplish exactly what they intended." A heavy silence followed her words, broken eventually by Elder Miriam, rising slowly from her seat. "Elena speaks wisdom beyond her years," the elder said firmly. "I, for one, refuse to be manipulated by fear into abandoning the legitimate heir this council itself confirmed through ancient ritual barely 2 weeks ago. Whoever orchestrated tonight's violence clearly intended exactly this reaction, division, and doubt sown among us, at precisely the moment unity matters most." Several other council members nodded in agreement, and Elena felt a cautious relief beginning to build within her chest, as the tide of the meeting slowly shifted away from Victor's careful manipulation. He remained silent for a long moment, his expression carefully neutral, before finally speaking again. "Perhaps you're correct," he said, his tone giving nothing away. I simply wish to ensure this council considered every possibility before proceeding further. If the consensus favors continued support for Elena's claim, I will, of course, respect that decision. The careful capitulation did little to ease Elena's suspicion regarding his true intentions, though the immediate crisis of losing council support appeared to have passed, at least for now. As the meeting concluded and council members began departing, Elena found herself approached by Caleb Voss, his expression carrying an unreadable mixture of calculation and something that might have been genuine concern. "That was skillfully handled," he said quietly. "You have your father's gift for turning fear into resolve rather than allowing it to fracture unity." "Thank you," Elena said carefully, uncertain how to interpret his approach, given her earlier suspicions about his true loyalties. "For what it's worth," Caleb continued, glancing around to ensure they were not overheard, "I did not orchestrate tonight's attack, nor do I know who did. Whatever complicated feelings my family holds regarding your return, we are not responsible for this particular danger." "Why tell me this?" Elena asked. "Because," Caleb said carefully, "whoever is truly working against you poses a danger to this entire community, myself included, regardless of whatever personal disagreements exist between our respective branches of the family. I would rather see a stable, legitimate leader in place than continued chaos benefiting whoever orchestrated tonight's violence." Elena studied his face carefully, uncertain whether to trust this apparent olive branch, but recognizing the practical wisdom behind his words regardless of his true underlying motivations. "I appreciate you telling me this," she said finally. "Whatever complications exist between us, I hope we can work together to identify the true source of this danger." Caleb nodded once, formally, before departing, leaving Elena to consider this new, unexpected potential alliance, alongside everything else she needed to navigate carefully. Damien appeared at her side moments later, his expression tense with lingering concern. "That conversation with Caleb," he said. "What did he want?" "To distance himself from tonight's attack," Elena said, "and perhaps to suggest an alliance of convenience, given that whoever orchestrated this violence threatens his own interests as well as mine." "Do you believe him?" Damien asked. "I honestly don't know," Elena admitted, "but I think, given everything happening around us, I need to remain open to unexpected alliances, even with people I don't entirely trust yet." Damien studied her thoughtfully, clearly weighing her words carefully. "That's a wise approach, though I would encourage continued caution regardless. Trust, once given carelessly, can prove considerably more dangerous than simple suspicion." As they walked together back toward the main estate, the weight of the day's events settling heavily around them, Elena found herself thinking of Lady Priscilla, still recovering in the medical wing, injured simply for the crime of supporting a legitimate claim to leadership. Whatever danger continued circling her, whoever truly orchestrated the growing campaign against her claim, Elena understood that the stakes had risen considerably beyond simple political maneuvering. People were being hurt now, directly, as a consequence of her return. The responsibility of that reality settled heavily upon her shoulders, strengthening her resolve, even as it deepened her fear, regarding exactly what dangers still awaited discovery in the days ahead. That night, unable to settle despite exhaustion weighing heavily on her body, Elena made her way to the medical wing to check on Lady Priscilla, finding the elderly woman awake and alert despite the bandages wrapped around her arm and shoulder. "Miss Voss," Lady Priscilla said, offering a weak but genuine smile as Elena entered. "I was hoping you might visit." "I'm so sorry this happened to you," Elena said, settling into a chair beside the bed. "Because you supported my claim." "Nonsense," Lady Priscilla said firmly. Despite the visible pain the effort of speaking clearly cost her. "I supported your claim because it was right, and because I remember your mother fondly enough to recognize what an honor it is to see her daughter finally return to us. Whoever attacked me did so because they fear exactly that truth, not because supporting you was somehow foolish." Elena felt tears gathering at the corners of her eyes, moved by the elderly woman's unwavering conviction, despite the violence she had endured. "Did you see who attacked you? Anything that might help identify them?" Lady Priscilla's expression grew thoughtful, clearly trying to recall details through the haze of pain and shock she had experienced. "It happened quickly," she said slowly. "I was walking near the eastern garden wall, unable to sleep, much as you apparently are tonight. Someone approached from behind, and I only caught a brief glimpse before everything went dark." A man, tall, wearing dark clothing. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I noticed something unusual. A ring on his hand, silver, with a distinctive crest engraved upon it. What kind of crest? Elena asked, leaning forward with sudden urgency. I only saw it briefly, Lady Priscilla admitted, but it resembled a hawk in flight, wings spread wide. I don't recognize it as belonging to any family I'm currently familiar with, though my memory for such details has certainly grown less reliable with age. Elena committed the description carefully to memory, understanding that this small detail might prove crucial in identifying whoever had orchestrated the attack. She thanked Lady Priscilla for her courage in sharing the information, despite her ongoing pain, and made her way immediately to find Damien, eager to share this potentially significant clue. She found him still awake in the estate's security office, reviewing footage from the night's events alongside Ronan, both men looking exhausted, but determined, as they searched for any additional evidence regarding the attack. A hawk crest, Damien repeated slowly, once Elena finished relaying Lady Priscilla's description. That's not a symbol I immediately recognize among the families currently active within our community. Could it belong to an outside organization? Ronan asked. Perhaps connected to whoever originally purchased Elena from her husband? Possible, Damien said, though his expression suggested he was considering other possibilities as well. Let me check something. He moved to a nearby bookshelf, pulling down an old, leather-bound volume that looked considerably older than most of the estate's other records. Flipping through carefully, he eventually paused, his expression shifting to something between surprise and grim satisfaction. Here, he said, turning the book toward Elena and Ronan. The page displayed an old family crest, a hawk in flight, wings spread wide, exactly matching Lady Priscilla's description. Whose crest is that? Elena asked, though something in Damien's careful expression suggested he already suspected the answer would prove significant. This belonged to a smaller allied family, Damien said slowly, one that served closely alongside Victor Crane's household for generations. Their main line largely disappeared from prominence years ago, but several members have continued operating as personal guards and enforcers for Victor's household specifically. The implication hung heavily in the air, and Elena felt her heart pounding with the weight of what this discovery potentially confirmed. You believe Victor sent someone to attack Lady Priscilla? I believe, Damien said carefully, that we now have our first genuine physical evidence, connecting tonight's violence directly to Victor Crane's household, rather than simply circumstantial suspicion, based on his political maneuvering during council sessions. Is it enough to confront him directly? Elena asked. Ronan shook his head slowly. A ring glimpsed briefly during a violent attack, connected to a family crest associated with Victor's household staff, remains far from conclusive proof. Victor would simply deny any knowledge, claim the attacker acted independently, or worse, suggest we're fabricating evidence to unjustly target him. Then what do we do? Elena asked, frustration mounting, as she considered how close they seemed to genuine answers, while still lacking the concrete proof necessary to act decisively. Damien closed the old book carefully, his expression thoughtful and determined. We continue gathering evidence, carefully and patiently, until we possess proof undeniable enough that Victor cannot simply deflect or explain away. In the meantime, we increase security around anyone who has publicly supported your claim, to prevent further attacks meant to intimidate your remaining allies. Elena nodded, understanding the wisdom behind careful patience, despite her growing frustration with the slow pace of uncovering the truth behind the danger surrounding her. How much longer can we afford to wait, though? Every day that passes without confronting the true source of this threat is another day someone else might be hurt. I know, Damien said quietly, his own frustration evident beneath his careful composure. But acting too quickly, without sufficient proof, risks losing whatever advantage we currently hold, and potentially alerting Victor that we suspect him directly, giving him the opportunity to cover his tracks even more carefully than he already has. As the conversation concluded, and Elena finally made her way back toward her own quarters, exhausted, but unable to fully relax despite the late hour, she found herself thinking of her father, wondering how he would have navigated this same delicate balance between patient investigation and decisive action against enemies working carefully to undermine everything he had built. Whatever answers finally emerged regarding Victor Crane's true involvement in the growing danger surrounding her claim, Elena understood that the confrontation, when it finally arrived, would likely prove decisive in determining not simply her own safety, but the future stability of the entire community her father had once protected so fiercely. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new careful maneuvering through treacherous political waters. Tonight, she allowed herself simply to hope that the mounting evidence continuing to gather against Victor Crane would soon prove sufficient to finally expose the truth that had remained hidden for far too long. The breakthrough came 3 days later, when Ronan burst into the small study where Elena and Damien had been reviewing security reports, his expression carrying an intensity that immediately signaled significant developments. "We found him," Ronan announced, "the man who attacked Lady Priscilla. One of our patrols recognized him near the northern perimeter last night, attempting what appeared to be another surveillance attempt. We apprehended him before he could escape." "Has he talked?" Damien asked, rising immediately from his seat. "Not yet," Ronan said. "But we found the ring, matching Lady Priscilla's description on his hand, along with several documents that appear to confirm direct employment within Victor Crane's household staff, dating back several years." Elena felt her pulse quicken, with anticipation mixed with dread. After days of careful, patient investigation, they finally seemed to be approaching the concrete proof necessary to confront Victor directly. "Where is he now?" "Secured in the same interrogation room we used with Perry," Ronan said. "I thought you would want to be present when we question him." They made their way quickly to the interrogation room, and Elena watched through the same one-way mirror as before, observing a tall, muscular man seated across from Ronan, his expression carrying defiant confidence rather than the nervous fear Perry had displayed during his own questioning. "You have nothing that connects me to any attack," the man said, his voice carrying the calm assurance of someone confident in his own protection. "I was simply walking near your grounds last night, trespassing perhaps, but nothing more serious than that." "We have a ring matching a description provided by the victim of a violent assault," Ronan said. "We have employment records confirming your direct connection to Victor Crane's household. I would strongly suggest you reconsider your current unwillingness to cooperate." "Victor Crane employs dozens of people," the man said dismissively. "My employment there proves nothing beyond the fact that I hold a job. As for the ring, plenty of rings exist bearing similar designs. You have circumstantial evidence at best, nothing that would hold up to serious scrutiny." Elena watched the exchange with growing frustration, understanding that this man had clearly been prepared for exactly this kind of interrogation, trained to deflect and minimize whatever evidence they presented against him. Damien's expression beside her grew increasingly grim as the questioning continued without producing any significant breakthrough. "May I try something?" Elena asked quietly. Damien glanced at her with obvious concern. "Elena, this man attacked an innocent woman. I don't think direct confrontation would be wise." "I'm not planning direct confrontation," Elena said. "I have an idea, but I need you to trust me." Damien studied her for a long moment before nodding reluctantly. "Be careful." Elena entered the interrogation room quietly, and the man's expression shifted immediately upon seeing her. Surprise mixed with something that looked almost like recognition, quickly masked behind renewed careful neutrality. "Elena Voss," he said, "I wondered if I might have the pleasure of meeting you directly." "I understand you work for Victor Crane," Elena said, settling into the chair across from him with careful composure, despite the fear churning within her. "I imagine he pays you generously for your particular services." "I don't discuss my employer's business arrangements," the man said, though something flickered behind his eyes that suggested her direct approach was catching him slightly off guard. "That's understandable," Elena said. "Loyalty is admirable, even when misplaced. Though I do wonder, given everything I've learned about Victor's true character, whether that loyalty is genuinely deserved." "What do you mean?" the man asked, curiosity briefly overtaking his careful defensive posture. "Only that men like Victor rarely extend genuine loyalty in return," Elena said carefully, drawing on instincts she was beginning to trust more completely with each passing day. "He uses people, discards them when they're no longer useful, and I suspect, given what happened to Lady Priscilla, that he's grown considerably more careless about protecting those who take risks on his behalf." The man's expression tightened slightly, and Elena pressed forward, sensing she had touched something significant. "If this investigation continues," she said, "if we eventually prove your connection to Victor's household, beyond any reasonable doubt, do you genuinely believe he'll stand beside you? Or will he simply claim you acted independently, sacrifice you to protect his own position, exactly as he's likely done to others before you? Silence stretched between them, and Elena watched carefully as uncertainty crept into the man's previously confident expression. You don't know Victor, he said finally, though his voice carried considerably less conviction than before. Perhaps not as well as you do, Elena acknowledged. But I know enough about the kind of man willing to orchestrate violence against innocent people to advance his political ambitions. Such men rarely extend genuine protection to those who serve them, particularly once that service becomes inconvenient or dangerous to their own interests. The man remained silent for a long moment, clearly wrestling with something significant. Finally he spoke, his voice noticeably less confident than before. What happens to me if I cooperate? That depends on what you're willing to share, Elena said carefully. But I can promise you considerably better treatment than whatever fate awaits you, if Victor decides you've become a liability worth eliminating. Another long silence followed, before the man finally began speaking, the careful defensive walls he had maintained throughout the earlier questioning finally beginning to crumble. Victor didn't order me to kill her, he said quietly. Only to frighten her, to send a message that would turn council opinion against your claim. He's been planning this for weeks, ever since the ritual confirmed your identity, beyond any reasonable doubt. What else has he been planning? Elena asked, her heart pounding as they finally approached genuine, actionable information. He's working with outside interests, the man admitted. The same faction that originally purchased you from your husband. Victor has been coordinating with them for years, long before your return, maintaining connections he established during the original conspiracy against your father. Elena felt the pieces finally falling into place, understanding at last the true scope of the betrayal that had shaped her entire life. Victor was involved in my father's downfall from the beginning. He orchestrated it, the man confirmed. I don't know all the details, but I've overheard enough over the years to understand that Victor convinced several other council members to support the original conspiracy, promising them expanded influence and territory once your father was removed from power. When your mother discovered the plot and tried to protect you, Victor arranged her death personally. The revelation struck Elena like a physical blow, and she gripped the edge of the table tightly, processing the enormity of what she had just learned. Her mother's death, the tragedy that had shaped her entire life, had been orchestrated directly by a man who had sat across from her during council meetings, offering careful, calculated skepticism about her identity, while all along knowing precisely who she was and what had truly happened to her family. And my father? She asked, her voice barely steady. Do you know what happened to him? The man hesitated, glancing nervously toward the mirror, as though suddenly reconsidering how much he was willing to reveal. I don't know for certain, he said finally. But I've heard Victor mention, on occasion, that your father's continued survival remains his greatest unfinished concern. That suggests, at minimum, that Victor believes your father may still be alive somewhere, hidden but not eliminated entirely. Hope and fear collided within Elena's chest at this revelation, the possibility that her father might genuinely still be alive somewhere, waiting, hidden, perhaps even searching for a way back to reclaim his rightful position. Where would Victor be searching for him? Do you know anything about that? Not specifically, the man admitted. But I know Victor has maintained certain resources dedicated to tracking rumors and sightings over the years, searching quietly for confirmation one way or another. If your father is genuinely alive, Victor considers him the final threat standing between himself and complete, unchallenged control over this community's future. Elena rose from her seat, understanding that she had gathered considerably more information than she had anticipated during this conversation. Thank you, she said quietly. Your cooperation will be remembered when decisions are made regarding your own fate. She left the interrogation room, finding Damien and Ronan waiting just outside, their expressions carrying a mixture of grim satisfaction and renewed urgency, as they had clearly overheard the entire exchange through the connected speaker system. We finally have him, Damien said, though his voice carried more weight than simple triumph. Direct testimony connecting Victor to your mother's death and the original conspiracy against your father. This is enough to bring formal charges before the full council. There's more, Elena said, her mind still racing through the implications of what she had just learned. He believes my father might still be alive, that Victor has been searching for him for years, considering him the final threat to complete control. Damien's expression shifted through several emotions rapidly, hope and concern intertwining as he processed this new information. If that's true, we need to move quickly. If Victor discovers we've gathered enough evidence to expose him, he may accelerate whatever plans he has for eliminating your father permanently, assuming he hasn't already succeeded in locating him. Then we need to confront him immediately, Elena said, determination replacing the earlier shock and grief that had briefly overwhelmed her upon learning the full truth. Before he has any opportunity to destroy evidence, or worse, to act against my father, before we can intervene. Ronan nodded firmly. I'll gather the necessary council members for an emergency session, with direct testimony connecting Victor to both the original conspiracy and tonight's attack against Lady Priscilla. We should have sufficient grounds to formally accuse him and demand immediate investigation into his broader activities. As preparations began for what promised to be the most significant confrontation Elena had yet faced within this hidden world she now belonged to, she found herself thinking of her mother, murdered for trying to protect her, and her father, potentially still alive somewhere, hunted for 18 years by a man who had successfully disguised his treachery behind careful diplomatic respectability. Whatever happened during the coming confrontation, Elena understood that she was finally approaching the true resolution of the tragedy that had shaped her entire life, a resolution that might finally bring genuine justice for her mother's death, and perhaps, if fortune favored her, the possibility of finally reuniting with the father she had never truly known. Damien's hand found hers gently as they made their way toward the council chamber, offering silent support and solidarity as they prepared to face whatever consequences their gathered evidence might trigger. Whatever happens, he said quietly, you are not facing this alone. Elena squeezed his hand gratefully, drawing strength from his steady presence beside her. Thank you, she said, for everything, for never giving up the search, for believing in the truth, even when others might have long ago abandoned hope. They reached the council chamber doors, and Elena took a steadying breath, understanding that whatever waited beyond them would likely determine not simply her own future, but the fate of an entire community that had suffered under the weight of hidden betrayal for far too long. Whatever fear remained within her, she pushed it aside, replaced by fierce determination to finally expose the truth and claim the justice her family had been denied for 18 agonizing years. The doors opened, and Elena stepped forward to face Victor Crane one final time, prepared, finally, to reveal exactly who had orchestrated the tragedy that had stolen her childhood, murdered her mother, and driven her father into hiding for nearly 2 decades. The council chamber filled quickly despite the late hour, word of an emergency session spreading rapidly throughout the estate. Elena stood at the center of the room, flanked by Damien and Elder Miriam, watching as council members took their seats with expressions ranging from confusion to growing alarm at the obvious tension filling the chamber. Victor Crane arrived last, his expression carefully composed, despite what must have been considerable surprise at being summoned so abruptly. "What is the meaning of this unusual session?" he asked, settling into his customary seat at the head of the table. "We have gathered evidence," Damien announced, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber, "connecting you directly to the attack against Lady Priscilla, and beyond that, to the original conspiracy that resulted in the death of Isolde Voss and the disappearance of Gideon Voss 18 years ago." The chamber erupted into shocked murmurs, and Elena watched Victor's face carefully, searching for any crack in his composed exterior. For a brief moment, something flickered behind his eyes, calculation mixed with genuine surprise at how quickly they had gathered concrete evidence against him. "These are serious accusations," Victor said, recovering his composure quickly. "I trust you have proof to substantiate such extraordinary claims, rather than simply circumstantial suspicion." "We have direct testimony," Ronan said, stepping forward, "from a man employed within your household staff, confirming your role in orchestrating the attack against Lady Priscilla, and providing additional details regarding your involvement in the original conspiracy against the Voss family." "Testimony," Victor said dismissively, "extracted through interrogation, from someone likely desperate to avoid consequences for their own criminal actions. Surely this council recognizes the unreliability of evidence gathered under such circumstances." "Perhaps," Elder Miriam said sharply, rising from her seat. But combined with the physical evidence of the ring, matching the crest of your family's allied household, and the pattern of consistent political maneuvering you've demonstrated since Elena's return, I find the totality of evidence considerably more convincing than simple coincidence would suggest. Victor's eyes narrowed slightly, and Elena noticed his hands, previously resting calmly on the table, now gripping the edge with visible tension. This council has served this community faithfully for 18 years, during a period of considerable uncertainty, he said, his voice carrying a harder edge than his usual careful diplomacy. I have dedicated my entire career to maintaining stability during that difficult time. These accusations, based on questionable testimony and circumstantial evidence, threaten to unravel years of careful work maintaining this community's security. Is that what you call it? Elena asked, finally speaking directly, her voice carrying clearly through the tense silence of the chamber. Careful work maintaining stability, or careful work maintaining your own accumulated power, built upon the murder of my mother and the destruction of my family? The chamber fell completely silent, every eye turning toward Victor, whose careful composure had finally begun visibly cracking beneath the weight of direct accusation. You have no understanding of the sacrifices required to maintain stability during difficult times, he said, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. Your father was a good man, but naive, unwilling to make the difficult decisions necessary to protect this community from outside threats that would have destroyed everything we've built. The admission, though not explicit, carried unmistakable implication, and gasps echoed through the chamber as council members began to understand the true weight of what Victor had just revealed through his defensive outburst. So you admit it, Damien said quietly, his voice carrying dangerous intensity. You admit your role in what happened to Gideon and Isolde Vos. Victor's expression shifted rapidly, calculation returning as he seemed to recognize the trap his own words had created. I admit nothing beyond acknowledging that difficult decisions were sometimes necessary during turbulent times, he said carefully, attempting to walk back the implications of his earlier statement. Whatever you believe you've uncovered through questionable testimony, I categorically deny orchestrating any conspiracy against the Vos family. Then explain, Elena said, stepping closer to the table, why a man in your employment attacked Lady Priscilla for the crime of supporting my legitimate claim. Explain why your household staff carries connections to families historically allied with conspiracies against my father's leadership. Explain, if you're truly innocent, why your position and influence grew so considerably during the exact years my family suffered such devastating tragedy. Victor's face had grown pale, sweat beading visibly at his temples despite the evening's cool temperature. Careful political navigation during difficult circumstances does not constitute proof of criminal conspiracy, he said, though his voice had lost much of its earlier confident authority. Perhaps not on its own, Elder Miriam said firmly, but combined with everything else we've gathered, I believe this council has more than sufficient grounds to formally suspend your position, pending full investigation into these serious allegations. A vote followed quickly, and Elena watched with cautious relief as council member after council member voted in favor of Victor's immediate suspension, the weight of accumulated evidence finally overcoming whatever political influence he had carefully cultivated over the years of her family's absence. Victor sat in stunned silence as the final votes were tallied, his careful mask of diplomatic composure completely shattered. This is not finished, he said finally, rising from his seat, his voice carrying a cold edge that sent a chill through Elena, despite her relief at the council's decision. You believe you've won something here tonight, but you understand nothing of the forces you're truly facing. There are powers beyond this council, beyond this entire community, that have been working toward specific goals for far longer than any of you realize. My removal changes nothing about the ultimate outcome already in motion. What do you mean? Damien demanded, stepping forward protectively as Victor's words carried unmistakable threat. Victor smiled coldly, an expression Elena had never seen him display during their previous encounters. Ask yourself, he said, why a conspiracy spanning 18 years, involving outside interests, considerably more powerful than this single council, would truly depend entirely on my continued involvement. I am merely one piece within a considerably larger arrangement, and my removal tonight accomplishes far less than you currently believe. Guards moved forward to escort Victor from the chamber, but his words lingered heavily in the air, casting a shadow over what should have felt like unambiguous victory. Elena exchanged a worried glance with Damien, both understanding that Victor's cryptic warning suggested the true danger surrounding her claim extended considerably beyond a single traitor within the council. As Victor was led away, still maintaining his cold, unsettling composure despite his obvious defeat, Elder Miriam approached Elena and Damien, her expression carrying similar concern despite the evening's apparent victory. "He's not wrong to suggest larger forces remain in play," she said quietly. "Victor's removal addresses one significant threat, but the outside interests he mentioned, the same faction that originally arranged your purchase from Marcus Hale, remain entirely unaddressed by tonight's proceedings." "Then our work is far from finished," Elena said, though relief at finally exposing Victor's true nature, mixed with renewed determination to understand the full scope of danger still surrounding her claim. "We need to understand exactly who these outside interests are, and what they truly want." Damien nodded grimly. "I'll have Ronan begin investigating immediately, focusing specifically on any connections between Victor's household and outside organizations. If we're fortunate, his removal may prompt panic among his associates, potentially revealing information they would otherwise have kept carefully hidden." As the council chamber slowly emptied, the tension of the evening's dramatic confrontation gradually giving way to exhausted relief mixed with renewed uncertainty, Elena found herself thinking once more of her father, wondering whether Victor's cryptic warning about larger forces still in motion might somehow connect to whatever fate had befallen him 18 years earlier. Whatever victory tonight represented, however significant exposing Victor Crane's betrayal truly was, Elena understood with growing clarity that the true resolution of her family's tragedy remained frustratingly incomplete. Somewhere beyond the walls of this estate, powerful forces continued working toward goals she did not yet fully understand, and until she uncovered their true identity and purpose, genuine safety would likely remain as elusive as it had been since the very night Marcus first sold her away into this dangerous, complicated world. 3 weeks passed following Victor Crane's removal from the council, weeks filled with careful investigation, cautious diplomacy, and the slow, steady work of rebuilding trust throughout a community that had suffered under hidden betrayal for far too long. Elena had grown considerably more confident during this time, stepping fully into the responsibilities that came with her confirmed identity as the rightful heir to her father's legacy. The investigation into Victor's outside connections had revealed a complex network of associates working across multiple regions, though many had scattered quickly following his exposure, understanding that their carefully hidden arrangements now faced serious scrutiny. Whether they represented a genuine ongoing threat, or simply opportunists who had aligned themselves with Victor's ambitions while they proved profitable, remained an open question that Damien and Ronan continued investigating carefully. Marcus Hale, Elena had learned through occasional updates from the protective organization that had relocated him, had settled into his new identity, somewhere far removed from the dangers that had once surrounded him. Whatever guilt or regret he continued carrying regarding his treatment of her, Elena found she no longer thought of him with the bitter anger that had once consumed her. He had become, in her mind, simply a difficult chapter from a life she had left behind entirely, replaced now by responsibilities and relationships considerably more significant than anything she had previously imagined possible. On a bright morning in early autumn, Elena stood once more in the council chamber, though this time the atmosphere carried none of the earlier tension and suspicion that had characterized her previous appearances. Instead, the gathered council members, along with representatives from allied families throughout the region, watched with evident anticipation as Elder Miriam prepared to officially confirm Elena's ascension to the throne her father had once held so faithfully. 18 years ago, Elder Miriam began, addressing the full assembly. Our community suffered a tragedy that left us without legitimate leadership, vulnerable to those who would exploit uncertainty for personal gain. Today, we correct that tragic absence, welcoming home the rightful heir, whose return has already demonstrated the wisdom, courage, and integrity necessary to lead this community into a considerably brighter future. Elena felt the weight of the moment settling over her, understanding fully now the significance of what she was about to formally accept. She thought of her mother, murdered protecting her secret, and her father, still missing despite months of careful searching, hoping desperately that wherever he might be, he could somehow sense this moment this fulfillment of everything he had sacrificed to protect. As Elder Miriam completed the formal ceremony, placing a simple silver circlet upon Elena's head, symbolic of the leadership she was now formally accepting, the chamber erupted into genuine celebration, considerably different from the cautious skepticism that had greeted her initial arrival months earlier. Even Caleb Voss, standing among the gathered witnesses, offered a genuine smile and respectful nod, their earlier complicated relationship having gradually developed into a cautious but genuine alliance, built through months of careful cooperation, investigating Victor's remaining network. Following the formal ceremony, as celebrations continued throughout the estate grounds, Elena found herself walking alone through the same garden where Damien had first explained the truth of her identity months earlier, seeking a quiet moment to process the enormous transformation her life had undergone since that terrifying night Marcus had sold her away into darkness. "You seem thoughtful," Damien said, finding her near the same fountain where she had first seen the photograph of her mother, holding her as an infant. "I'm thinking about how far I've come," Elena said, turning to face him with a genuine smile. "Months ago, I was someone's unwanted wife, believing myself powerless and worthless. Now I'm standing here as the leader of an entire community, wearing a crown that connects me to parents I never truly knew. You've earned every bit of this transformation," Damien said, moving closer, his expression carrying the same warmth that had grown steadily between them throughout the challenging months of investigation and political navigation. "Your strength, your wisdom, your genuine care for the people you now lead, none of that came from simply discovering your bloodline. It came from who you chose to become, despite everything working against you." Elena felt her heart swelling with emotion as she studied his face, understanding fully now the depth of feeling that had developed between them since that first terrifying night she arrived at this estate, frightened and uncertain about everything her life had suddenly become. "Damien," she said softly, "these past months, facing everything together, discovering my true identity, exposing Victor's betrayal, none of it would have felt survivable without you standing beside me throughout." "I meant what I told you weeks ago," Damien said, reaching for her hand gently. "My feelings toward you extend considerably beyond simple duty to your father's memory. I love you, Elena, not simply as the heir I searched for so many years, but as the remarkable woman you've proven yourself to be throughout this entire journey." The words hung in the warm autumn air between them, and Elena felt tears gathering unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes, moved by the genuine sincerity carrying through his voice. "I love you too," she said finally, the admission feeling both natural and deeply significant after months of carefully restrained feelings, finally finding their proper expression. "Whatever challenges remain ahead, whatever dangers still lurk from Victor's scattered network, I want to face them with you beside me, not simply as my protector, but as someone I choose to build a genuine life alongside." Damien's expression filled with quiet joy, and he drew her gently into his arms, the careful distance they had maintained throughout their complicated professional relationship, finally dissolving entirely into something considerably more personal and profound. "Then let us build that life together," he said softly, "starting today, as you formally claim the leadership your father always intended for you, and, as we finally allow ourselves the happiness we've both been carefully avoiding acknowledging." As they stood together in the quiet garden, celebration continuing to echo from the estate grounds beyond, Elena felt a profound sense of completion settling over her, the culmination of a journey that had begun with devastating betrayal and transformed, through courage and determination, into genuine strength and unexpected love. A messenger arrived moments later, breathless from apparently searching throughout the grounds, carrying a sealed letter that had arrived through anonymous courier just that morning. "Forgive the interruption," the messenger said, "but Ronan believed this required your immediate attention, given the unusual circumstances of its delivery." Elena accepted the letter carefully, noting the absence of any identifying marks or return address. She broke the seal cautiously, unfolding the parchment inside, and felt her breath catch entirely as she recognized the careful, familiar handwriting that filled the page, handwriting she had seen only once before, in old letters preserved within the estate's private records. "My dearest daughter," the letter began, "I have watched your journey from a distance I dare not yet close, waiting until I could be certain you were truly safe, before revealing myself. Word has reached me of Victor's exposure and removal, and I understand now, that the greatest danger threatening your safety has finally been addressed. Soon, when I am certain no remaining threats could endanger you through our reunion, I will come home. Your mother would be immeasurably proud of the woman you have become. I know I certainly am. With all my love, your father, Gideon. Elena felt tears streaming freely down her face as she read the letter a second time, hardly able to believe the words before her. Damien moved close, reading over her shoulder, his own expression filled with cautious hope and genuine emotion. He's alive, Elena whispered. My father is truly alive. It appears so, Damien said softly, his voice thick with emotion of his own, having spent so many years searching faithfully for exactly this confirmation. And if this letter is genuine, he's been watching your journey carefully, waiting for the right moment to finally return. Elena clutched the letter carefully against her chest, feeling a profound joy she had not anticipated experiencing on what was already the most significant day of her new life. The tragedy that had shaped her entire existence, the murder of her mother, the disappearance of her father, the years of hidden identity and stolen childhood, all of it seemed to be finally, genuinely, moving toward true resolution. We need to find him, she said, determination replacing her earlier tears. Now that Victor's threat has been neutralized, now that I've formally claimed my rightful place, there's no reason for him to remain hidden any longer. We'll begin searching immediately, Damien promised, with the resources now available to us as the confirmed and accepted leader of this community. Finding him should prove considerably easier than our previous efforts during the years of uncertainty. As they made their way back toward the ongoing celebration, Elena felt the weight of everything she had endured finally settling into something resembling genuine peace. She had arrived at this estate months earlier, as a woman discarded and sold, believing herself worthless and powerless. She was leaving that chapter of her life behind entirely now, transformed into someone who had claimed her rightful legacy, exposed a dangerous betrayal that had shaped an entire community's history, found genuine love with someone who had dedicated years to protecting her, and discovered, in this final unexpected letter, hope that her family might yet be fully reunited. The Alpha King's lost treasure, the daughter sold away by a husband who never understood her true worth, had finally, completely, come home. Whatever challenges remained ahead, whatever final threats might still emerge from Victor's scattered network of associates, Elena understood that she now faced them, not as a victim of circumstance, but as a woman who had claimed her own strength, her own identity, and her own genuine happiness through courage, determination, and the unwavering support of those who had proven their loyalty through action rather than simple words. As evening fell over the estate grounds, celebration continuing well into the night, in honor of their newly confirmed leader, Elena stood once more at her bedroom window, looking out over gardens that had become genuinely familiar to her over these past transformative months. She touched the crescent scar on her wrist, the mark that had once seemed like nothing more than a forgotten childhood accident, now understood as the symbol that had connected her, all along, to a legacy of strength, sacrifice, and genuine love that had waited 18 years for her safe return. Somewhere beyond these walls, her father remained hidden but alive, watching carefully for the right moment to finally return home. Beside her, Damien's steady presence promised a future built on genuine partnership and love, rather than simple duty or obligation. And within her own heart, Elena carried the unshakable knowledge that whatever came next, she would face it as exactly who she had always been meant to become, the true and rightful heir, finally, completely, home.